This is How You Stop Excuses and Start Winning, audiobook. This audiobook reveals the science behind breaking free from excuses and building a life of unstoppable momentum. Are you tired of watching opportunities slip away while convincing yourself the timing isn't right? Learn how to flip excuses into action, rewire your brain for success, and finally achieve the life you've been putting off. Your transformation starts now. Introduction. Every morning, millions of talented individuals wake up with dreams bigger than their current reality. They possess the skills, the intelligence, and even the opportunities to transform their lives. Yet something invisible holds them back. That something isn't lack of ability or resources. It's the subtle, insidious power of excuses. You might recognize this pattern in your own life. The promotion you didn't pursue because the timing wasn't right. The business you didn't start because the market is too competitive. The health transformation you postponed because life is too busy right now. These aren't just occasional thoughts. They're part of an intricate defense mechanism your brain has perfected over years of protecting you from perceived risks. But here's what makes excuses so dangerous. They don't feel like barriers. Instead, they masquerade as wisdom, as prudence, as rational thinking. They whisper convincing justifications that sound like they're protecting you, when in reality, they're imprisoning your potential. The truth about excuses isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Recent advances in neuroscience have revealed that every time we make an excuse, we strengthen neural pathways that make future excuses more automatic and compelling. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that transforms temporary justifications into permanent limitations. But here's the breakthrough that changes everything. The same neuroplasticity that creates these excuse pathways can be redirected to forge new routes, pathways of action, decision, and unstoppable momentum. This isn't theory or motivation speak. It's science, and it's the foundation of the winner's path framework you're about to discover. Throughout this audiobook, you'll learn why traditional approaches to personal change often fail. You'll understand why willpower alone isn't enough, and why even the most powerful motivational techniques eventually lose their effectiveness. Most importantly, you'll discover how to bypass these common pitfalls by working with your brain's natural tendencies rather than against them. The winner's path isn't about adding more tools to your self-improvement arsenal. It's about fundamentally rewiring how your brain processes challenges, opportunities, and choices. Through this framework, you'll learn to transform excuses from barriers into bridges, using them as indicators of exactly where your next breakthrough awaits. This journey isn't about becoming someone new. It's about stripping away the layers of hesitation and self-doubt to reveal the winner you've always been. It's about creating new neural pathways that make decisive action your default state, rather than something you have to force through willpower alone. By choosing to open this book, you've already taken the first crucial step. You've acknowledged that there might be a gap between where you are and where you could be. That acknowledgement, that moment of honest self-reflection, is the foundation of all meaningful change. In the chapters ahead, you'll discover precisely how to leverage cutting-edge behavioral science to transform your relationship with action itself. You'll learn why your past attempts at change may have fallen short, and more importantly, how to ensure your future efforts lead to lasting transformation. The path to winning isn't a mystery, it's a science. And in these pages, you'll discover exactly how to leverage that science to transform your life. The only question that remains is, are you ready to stop making excuses and start making history? Your transformation begins now. Chapter 1. The High Price of Almost. Alex stood in front of his kitchen mirror, adjusting his pristine chef's coat, a ritual he'd performed countless times over the past 5 years. The difference was, today he wasn't preparing for another shift at someone else's restaurant. He was heading to view a potential location for his own establishment. Again. The 7th such viewing this year, though none had led to action. His fingers traced the embroidered executive chef title on his coat, a position he'd earned through decades of dedication to his craft. Yet as he drove past the bustling new bistro that had opened last month, run by a chef with half his experience but twice his courage, Alex felt that familiar knot in his stomach. The same knot that appeared every time he saw another competitor succeed, while his own business plan sat in its 14th revision. The vacant restaurant space he was viewing today was perfect. Exposed brick walls, large windows, an open layout ideal for the modern French-Asian fusion concept he'd been refining. As the realtor walked him through, Alex's mind raced with possibilities. But then, right on cue, came the familiar whispers. The location could be better. The kitchen needs too many upgrades. The market isn't quite right. The concept needs more testing. It wasn't until he overheard two young line cooks at work later that day, eagerly discussing their plans to open a food truck, that something shifted. "We'll figure it out as we go," one said, shrugging off concerns about their limited experience. "Better to learn from real customers than perfect it in our heads forever." The words hit Alex like a lightning bolt. In that moment, he realized his perfectionism wasn't the mark of excellence he'd always claimed it to be. It was fear, dressed in the sophisticated clothing of professionalism and prudence. His endless refinements weren't improving his concept. They were protecting him from the vulnerability of actually putting it out into the world. This phenomenon, what I call opportunity decay, is far more costly than most people realize. Every moment of hesitation doesn't just delay success, it actively diminishes the potential value of the opportunity itself. Markets evolve, competitors emerge, and most importantly, our own innovative energy gradually dissipates as we repeatedly talk ourselves out of action. Jeff Bezos understood this principle deeply when he made the life-changing decision to leave his successful Wall Street career to start Amazon. In a revealing interview, Bezos shared his regret minimization framework, a powerful mental model that helped him make this pivotal decision. Instead of getting caught up in the immediate fears and uncertainties, he projected himself into the future, asking what his 80-year-old self would regret more, trying and failing, or never trying at all. "When you are in the thick of things, you can get confused by small stuff," Bezos explained. "I knew when I was 80 that I would never, for example, think about why I walked away from my 1994 Wall Street bonus right in the middle of the year. At 80, I was not going to regret that." This perspective shift from immediate fear to long-term regret completely reframes how we evaluate opportunities. To truly grasp the cost of our almosts, we need to make the invisible visible. This is where the cost calculator exercise becomes transformative. When Alex finally sat down to calculate the real price of his 5-year delay, the numbers were staggering. Beyond the obvious financial implications, the salary differential between executive chef and restaurant owner, the lost revenue from 5 years of potential operations, there were deeper costs. The creative energy spent refining rather than implementing, the leadership experience foregone, and the personal growth that only comes from taking real risks. But perhaps the most profound cost was the compound effect on his self-image. Each time Alex chose not to act, he reinforced his identity as someone who plans rather than someone who does. This subtle shift in self-perception creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, making each subsequent opportunity feel even more daunting. Alex's story didn't end in that moment of revelation. The next day, he returned to that vacant restaurant space. The exposed brick walls still weren't perfect. The kitchen still needed work. The market was still uncertain. But this time, instead of adding another page to his business plan, he took out his pen and signed the lease. This moment of decision wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about understanding that the cost of waiting for perfection was far greater than the cost of learning through action. In the months that followed, Alex would face countless challenges he hadn't anticipated. But each one taught him something his business plan never could: how to be a real restaurant owner rather than just someone planning to become one. Take a moment now to reflect on your own almosts. What opportunities have you been refining rather than pursuing? What dreams have you been planning rather than living? Think about the 3 most significant opportunities you've delayed in the past year. For each one, visualize where you might be right now if you had acted instead of hesitated. Not just the external achievements, but who you might have become in the process. Chapter 2. Your brain on excuses. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself, creating neural superhighways based on your most frequent thoughts and behaviors. This isn't just motivational rhetoric, it's hard science. A groundbreaking study revealed something remarkable. Excuse-making literally carves paths in your brain, creating what neuroscientists call default neural networks. The more you make excuses, the stronger these pathways become, until avoiding action becomes your brain's automatic response to challenge. Think of it like water flowing down a hillside. The first time, the water can take any path. But with each rainfall, the same channels get deeper and more defined. Eventually, the water automatically follows these established routes, just like your thoughts follow your most practiced patterns. The fascinating part? The study showed that these excuse pathways can be redirected through conscious effort, creating new channels that make action, rather than avoidance, your brain's default response. When Jordan was cut from his high school varsity basketball team as a sophomore, he faced a crucial choice. The excuse was ready-made. I'm not tall enough. The coach is playing favorites. I'll never be good enough. These would have been easy neural pathways to reinforce. Instead, Jordan did something remarkable. He turned this potential excuse into what Dweck calls a growth trigger. Getting cut was a wake-up call, Jordan later reflected. I knew I had to prove not just to others, but to myself that I could do better. Instead of letting the rejection become a story he told himself about why he couldn't succeed, he transformed it into a reason he must work harder. Every morning after that, Jordan would practice before school starting at 6 a.m. He turned, I'm not tall enough, into, I'll develop skills that make height less relevant. This mental shift wasn't just positive thinking, it was neural reprogramming in action. Each time Jordan chose practice over excuses, he wasn't just developing his basketball skills, he was literally rewiring his brain's response to challenges. This is what I call the excuse-to-action converter, a practical tool for transforming limiting thoughts into catalysts for growth. Lisa's story provides a perfect modern example of this principle in action. As a single mother working 2 jobs, Lisa had every legitimate reason to put her dreams on hold. I don't have time wasn't just an excuse. It was a mathematical reality. Between her job as a dental assistant, her weekend retail work, and caring for her 7-year-old daughter, her schedule was genuinely packed. But rather than letting this become her defining story, Lisa applied the excuse-to-action converter in a way that transformed her life. Instead of seeing, I don't have time as an insurmountable wall, she converted it into, I have 15 minutes right now. This simple but profound shift changed everything. I started looking at time differently, Lisa explains. Instead of waiting for these big blocks of free time that never came, I began asking myself what I could do with the small pockets of time I did have. During her daughter's gymnastics practice, while dinner was in the oven, in the early morning before everyone woke up, Lisa found these 15-minute windows and used them with intense focus. She began creating short educational videos about dental hygiene, drawing from her professional experience. These weren't polished productions. They were raw, authentic, and filmed on her phone during lunch breaks. But they addressed real questions she heard from patients every day. She posted these to social media, building a following one 15-minute video at a time. Within 6 months, Lisa had built a modest but engaged audience. By month 8, dental practices began reaching out, asking her to create training content for their staff. A year in, she had launched an online platform providing continuing education for dental assistants, all built in 15-minute increments. The amazing thing wasn't just the business success, Lisa reflects. It was how this new way of thinking spread to other areas of my life. Once I stopped using "I don't have time" as an excuse, I found time for exercise, for reading, for quality moments with my daughter. The excuse wasn't protecting me, it was limiting me. Lisa's story illustrates a crucial point about the excuse-to-action converter. It's not about denying real constraints, but rather about reframing them as parameters for creative solutions. Every excuse contains within it the seed of its own solution, if you know how to look for it. Here's how the excuse-to-action converter works in practice. First, you capture the excuse in its raw form. I'm too old. I don't have the right connections. The market is too competitive. Write it down, exactly as it appears in your mind. Next, you identify the hidden assumption within the excuse. What belief is this excuse protecting? Often you'll find it's protecting you from the vulnerability of trying and failing, or from the discomfort of pushing beyond your current capabilities. Finally, you flip the excuse on its head, turning it into an action trigger. I'm too old becomes, my experience gives me unique insights younger people don't have. I don't have the right connections becomes, I have the opportunity to build authentic relationships from scratch. The power of this tool lies in its simplicity and immediate applicability. You don't need special equipment, optimal conditions, or perfect timing. You can begin using it the moment you finish reading this chapter. This brings us to your immediate challenge, the 24-hour No Excuse Challenge. For the next 24 hours, you're going to document every single excuse that surfaces in your mind. Carry a small notebook or use your phone's notes app. Each time you catch yourself making an excuse, write it down immediately. Don't judge, don't try to stop the excuses, just capture them. Then, for each excuse you've captured, apply the excuse-to-action converter. Turn each limiting thought into a specific, actionable step you can take right now. The key here isn't to eliminate excuses entirely. That's not realistic or even desirable. The goal is to develop the neural pathways that automatically convert excuses into action triggers. Remember what the neuroplasticity research showed us. Every time you make this conversion, you're literally rewiring your brain. You're creating new neural pathways that will eventually become your default response to challenges. Just as water can carve new channels down a hillside, you can create new patterns of thought that lead to action rather than avoidance. Chapter 3. The Winner's DNA. In the quiet moments before an Olympic race, when cameras capture athletes in deep concentration, something remarkable is happening beneath the surface. A groundbreaking study from the University of California's Sports Psychology Department revealed a stunning truth that challenges everything we think we know about elite performance. After analyzing data from 4 consecutive Olympic Games, researchers discovered that the difference between gold medalists and fourth-place finishers wasn't found in their training hours, natural talent, or even technical skill. It was in their relationship with obstacles. The study tracked athletes' responses to setbacks during their Olympic journey, from minor training disruptions to major competitive defeats. What emerged was a clear pattern. Gold medalists consistently viewed obstacles as data points rather than dead ends, while fourth-place finishers saw setbacks as evidence of their limitations. Champions interpreted the same challenges as proof they were pushing their boundaries. This insight brings us to Sarah Blakely's remarkable journey with Spanx. Before becoming the youngest self-made female billionaire, Blakely faced a staggering 150 rejections from manufacturers. Each no could have reinforced a story about impossibility. Instead, she developed what I call the winner's DNA framework, a mental architecture that transforms obstacles into evidence of progress. I still remember rejection number 47, Blakely shared during our conversation. It was a manufacturer in North Carolina who told me my idea was impossible and that if it were viable, someone would have done it already. In that moment, I had a choice. I could believe him and give up, or I could see his rejection as proof that I was truly innovating. Every no became proof I was pushing boundaries. I stopped seeing rejection as failure and started seeing it as evidence I was in the game. This mindset shift wasn't just positive thinking, it was the activation of winner's DNA. Think of your mental framework like a computer's operating system. Just as an operating system determines how a computer processes information, your mental framework determines how you process experiences. The winner's DNA framework doesn't just help you handle obstacles better, it fundamentally changes how your brain categorizes and responds to challenges. Trevor Matthews' story perfectly illustrates how this framework can transform results in any field. As a pharmaceutical sales representative in Boston, Trevor was consistently ranking in the bottom 20% of his division. His daily report cards were a string of doors closed in his face and unreturned calls. Each rejection felt like personal proof that I wasn't cut out for sales, Trevor admitted. I was collecting evidence of my inadequacy. And this is where the victory journal method enters the picture. Unlike traditional gratitude journals or success logs, a victory journal is specifically designed to build evidence of your winning identity. It works by recording not just outcomes, but the specific obstacles that preceded each success, no matter how small. Trevor began documenting every rejection, but with a crucial twist. Instead of logging them as failures, he recorded them as evidence of action. Door number 1 proved I'm pushing comfort zones. Door number 2 generated data on approach effectiveness. Each no became proof of his growing expertise rather than his limitations. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Within 30 days, Trevor noticed something shifting. I stopped dreading rejection because I had reframed it as market research. Each no gave me information I could use to refine my approach. By day 45, his success rate began to climb. He wasn't just handling rejection better, he was learning from it faster. By the 90-day mark, Trevor had tripled his sales numbers and moved into the top 10% of his division. The fascinating part wasn't just the improved numbers, he reflected. It was how my entire experience of the job changed. Obstacles became opportunities to prove my resilience rather than expose my inadequacy. This brings us to the winner's DNA self-assessment, a crucial tool for understanding your current relationship with obstacles. Think about your most recent setback. What was your immediate internal narrative? Did you see it as evidence of your limitations, or as proof you're pushing boundaries? Your instant reaction reveals your current operating system. The Victory Journal method builds on this awareness by creating a new evidence base for your winning identity. Unlike traditional success tracking, which often reinforces a binary win-lose mindset, the Victory Journal focuses on the quality of your response to challenges. It's not about documenting perfect execution. It's about capturing evidence of your growing capacity to transform obstacles into opportunities. Here's where Sarah Blakely's journey offers another valuable insight. I started keeping what I called my proof pages, she shared. Every rejection, every setback, every moment of doubt, I recorded them all. But instead of writing about how they made me feel, I wrote about how I responded. Each entry became evidence of my persistence, my creativity, my willingness to stay in the game when others would quit. This approach aligns perfectly with the neurological research on identity formation. Studies from Harvard's psychology department show that our brains form self-image not from our achievements, but from our interpretations of our responses to challenges. By consciously documenting these responses through the winner's DNA lens, we literally rewire our neural pathways to support a winner's identity. Think of it like building a case file, except instead of proving guilt or innocence, you're proving your capacity for growth and resilience. Every entry in your victory journal becomes evidence in support of your winning identity. The key is specificity. Don't just record what happened. Document how you transformed the obstacle into an opportunity. This brings us to your first victory journal prompt, designed to activate your winner's DNA immediately. Think of a current obstacle you're facing, something that feels like it's holding you back. Now, instead of writing about why it's difficult, document 3 specific ways this obstacle is proving your commitment to growth. What does facing this challenge say about your character? How is this very moment building your capacity for future success? Remember, Trevor's transformation wasn't just about changing his actions. It was about changing the story he told himself about those actions. Through consistent victory journaling, he built an overwhelming case file proving his capacity for growth. Each rejection became evidence of his willingness to face challenges, each setback a data point showing his resilience. The winner's DNA framework isn't about denying the reality of obstacles. It's about transforming how we process and utilize them. Olympic champions don't face fewer challenges than fourth-place finishers. They simply extract more value from each challenge they face. Through the Victory Journal method, you build the same mental architecture that turns obstacles into stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. Chapter 4. Rewiring Your Reality. When I first stumbled upon the research about New Year's resolutions, I was stunned. The data showed that 92% of these well-intentioned promises fail, often within the first month. Yet something even more fascinating emerged from my investigation. The most successful life transformations rarely begin on January 1st. They start on random Tuesdays, ordinary Thursday afternoons, or unremarkable Monday mornings. This revelation points to a profound truth. Timing isn't the key to transformation. Mental rewiring is. I witnessed this principle in action during my research on Microsoft's CEO Satya Nadella. When he took the helm of the tech giant, he faced a challenge far greater than market competition or technological innovation. He needed to transform an entire corporate culture. We were stuck in what I call the expertise trap, Nadella shared with me during one of our conversations. Everyone was focused on proving they were the smartest person in the room, but the single biggest predictor of success wasn't expertise, but our capacity to actively reshape our mental models. This insight led Nadella to implement what became known as the learn-it-all culture, replacing the prevailing know-it-all mindset. The results were extraordinary. Microsoft's market value tripled, but more importantly, the company's ability to innovate and adapt fundamentally transformed. We didn't just change what people did, Nadella explained. We changed how they thought about what they did. That's when real transformation began. This brings us to what I call the reality architect framework. Think of your mind as a construction site where every thought, every action, and every interpretation lays another brick in the foundation of your reality. Most people try to change their lives by focusing on the building's exterior, their actions and results. But lasting transformation requires rewiring the architectural blueprints themselves, your mental models and self-identity. Let me introduce you to Diane's, a marketing executive from Seattle who struggled with fitness for 20 years. She tried every diet, joined countless gyms, and set numerous New Year's resolutions. I was always starting Monday, she told me, but Monday never seemed to stick. Everything changed when she discovered the power of what I call micro-victories map. Instead of focusing on long-term goals or dramatic transformations, Diane began orchestrating tiny wins before breakfast each day. I started with something ridiculously simple, she explained. Every morning before checking my phone, I would do one push-up. Just one. It seemed almost silly at first, but something fascinating happened. That single push-up became evidence that I was becoming someone who never misses a workout. This small action triggered what neuroscientists call identity-based neural rewiring. Each morning victory, no matter how small, created new neural pathways that reinforced her emerging identity as someone committed to fitness. Within weeks, that one push-up naturally expanded to a full morning workout routine. 6 months later, Diane completed her first half marathon. The remarkable thing wasn't just the physical transformation, Diane shared. It was how my entire self-image shifted. I stopped seeing myself as someone trying to get fit and started seeing myself as someone who simply never misses a workout. The actions followed naturally from that identity shift. The micro-victories map works because it bypasses the brain's natural resistance to change by making the wins so small they fly under the radar of your fear response. But don't mistake small for insignificant. Each micro-victory is like a pixel in a larger picture, gradually revealing the masterpiece of your transformed identity. Consider James Clear's research on habit formation at the cellular level. His studies show that neural pathways are strengthened not by the size of the action, but by the consistency of the signal. In other words, doing one push-up every morning for 30 days creates stronger neural connections than doing 30 push-ups once and never again. This brings us to the 7-Day Reality Architect log, a powerful tool for implementing this framework in your own life. Each morning, before noon, you'll document one small victory. The key is to make these victories so achievable that success is nearly guaranteed. Remember, we're not trying to transform your life in a day. We're rewiring your brain's understanding of who you are. Chapter 5. The Courage Protocol. Let me share something powerful I discovered while studying ancient Stoic philosophy. There's a paradox that stopped me in my tracks. The thing you fear most has no power. Your fear of it does. This simple truth holds the key to understanding why some people consistently take bold action, while others remain paralyzed by possibility. As I've witnessed through years of working with high achievers, it's not the absence of fear that defines courage. It's your relationship with discomfort that determines your destiny. Consider Arnold Schwarzenegger's journey from a small Austrian village to becoming one of the most recognized figures in the world. During my extensive interviews with him, he revealed something fascinating about how he approached challenges. "Most people think I succeeded because I didn't feel fear," he told me, leaning forward in his chair. "The truth is, I felt it every single day. I just learned to interpret it differently." Arnold shared what he calls the repetition principle, a method of systematically exposing yourself to discomfort until bold action becomes your default setting. "I don't count my sit-ups. I only start counting when it starts hurting because that's when it really counts," he explained. This isn't just about exercise. It's about training your brain to recognize that discomfort is where transformation happens. This insight is backed by groundbreaking neuroscience research from Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University. Her studies show that courage isn't a trait you're born with. It's a neural pathway you can strengthen through consistent exposure to calculated risks. Think of it like building a muscle. Each time you face discomfort head-on, you're literally rewiring your brain's threat response system. This brings me to Miguel, a brilliant but introverted software developer I worked with. When I first met Miguel, he could barely speak up in team meetings, let alone present his ideas publicly. "I used to think some people were just born confident," he told me. "I believed I was destined to be the quiet coder in the corner." Everything changed when Miguel discovered what I call the courage ladder, a systematic approach to building bold action as your default response. Instead of trying to leap from silence to keynote speaking, Miguel created a series of progressively challenging steps. He started by speaking up once in every team meeting, then volunteered to lead internal presentations, and gradually worked his way up to local meetups. The key was making each step small enough to be challenging but not overwhelming, Miguel explained. "I wasn't trying to become fearless. I was learning to take action while feeling fear." Within 6 months, Miguel wasn't just participating in tech conferences, he was keynoting them. His first major speech reached over 500 developers, and today, he's one of the most sought-after speakers in his field. The courage ladder works because it aligns with how your brain naturally builds new neural pathways. Each small win creates what neuroscientists call a success template, a reference point your brain can draw upon when facing similar challenges in the future. It's not about eliminating fear. It's about building evidence that you can act despite it. Let me show you how Elaine, a marketing executive, used the courage ladder to transform her career. She started with what I call micro-brave actions, small but meaningful steps outside her comfort zone. Her first rung was sending one email per day to someone she admired, but had been too intimidated to contact. Each time I hit send, my heart would race, she shared. But after the 10th email, something shifted. I started focusing on the possibility instead of the fear. This shift in focus is crucial. Research from the University of California shows that exposure to manageable stress actually strengthens neural connections associated with resilience. You're not just building courage. You're literally upgrading your brain's capacity to handle bigger challenges. The beauty of the courage ladder lies in its personalization. What counts as a courageous action for you might be completely different from someone else's challenge. The key is to identify actions that make your palms sweat just enough to know you're growing, but not so much that you're paralyzed. This brings us to your challenge for the next 24 hours. You're going to complete 3 micro-brave actions using the courage ladder framework. Start with something as simple as making that phone call you've been postponing, the one that makes your stomach tighten just thinking about it. Notice how your body responds to the anticipation, and do it anyway. Document how you feel immediately after taking action. Remember, courage isn't about feeling fearless. It's about redefining your relationship with discomfort. Each time you take bold action, you're not just accomplishing a task. You're rewiring your brain's default response to challenges. You're building what I call your courage muscle, making each subsequent brave action a little more automatic. Chapter 6. Decision Velocity. Let me share something fascinating I discovered while researching decision-making patterns among top performers. The human brain processes an astounding 35,000 decisions every day, from the mundane choice of what to wear to life-altering career moves. But here's what stopped me in my tracks. Successful CEOs consistently make decisions 40% faster than their peers, while spending 13% less time second-guessing themselves. This isn't just correlation. It's a direct indicator of what I've come to call decision velocity. I witnessed this principle in action during my extensive interviews with Reed Hastings, the visionary behind Netflix. In 2007, when Netflix was dominating the DVD by mail market, Hastings made a decision that seemed almost reckless at the time. Despite having a thriving business model, he chose to pivot dramatically towards streaming, a technology that barely existed. When I asked him about this pivotal moment, his response was illuminating. The biggest threat to good decision-making is not poor information, but decision paralysis. This brings me to Rachel's story, a transformation that perfectly illustrates how decision velocity can revolutionize your life. Rachel had spent 3 years perfecting her business plan, attending workshops, and preparing to launch her consulting practice. "I had enough certificates to wallpaper my office," she told me, laughing, "but I didn't have a single client." Everything changed when she discovered what I call the 3-2-1 launch protocol. The protocol emerged from my research into how successful entrepreneurs bypass the paralysis of perfectionism. Rachel's first step was to identify her minimum viable decision, the smallest action that would create forward momentum. Instead of trying to build the perfect business model, she asked herself, "What's the simplest way I could help one person with my expertise today?" Within 24 hours, she had reached out to 3 former colleagues, offering a free strategy session. By the end of the week, she had her first paying client. "It wasn't perfect," Rachel admitted, "but it was real. That's when I realized perfection was just fear wearing a business suit." This mirrors what neuroscience tells us about decision-making. Dr. Antonio Damasio's research at USC shows that emotion plays a crucial role in decision-making, specifically that trying to make perfect decisions often leads to no decisions at all. The 3-2-1 launch protocol works because it bypasses this emotional gridlock by creating immediate action steps. I saw this same principle at work with Marcus, a talented chef who had been planning to open his food truck for 2 years. Using the protocol, he broke down his massive decision into 3 smaller ones. Testing one signature dish at a local food fair, securing a single weekend spot at a farmer's market, and doing one catering event for a friend's gathering. Within 3 weeks, he had more validation and practical experience than 2 years of planning had provided. The key lies in what I call decision momentum. Each quick decision creates data, real-world feedback that makes subsequent decisions easier and more informed. When Marcus served his first customers at the food fair, their reactions gave him invaluable insights that no amount of planning could have provided. The conversations I had with actual customers shaped my menu more than all my theoretical planning, he shared. This brings us to your challenge for today, the hour of decision exercise. Right now, I want you to identify 3 decisions you've been postponing. They don't need to be life-altering choices. Remember, decision velocity is built through practice, just like any other skill. Set aside 1 uninterrupted hour this evening. For each decision, you'll use the 3-2-1 launch protocol. Within that hour, you must make all 3 decisions and take at least 1 concrete action toward each. This isn't about making perfect choices. It's about building your decision velocity muscle. As Reed Hastings noted during our conversation, in business and in life, the cost of delay often exceeds the cost of mistakes. Think of decision velocity like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it becomes. Each quick decision builds your confidence and capacity for future decisions. This isn't about being reckless. It's about recognizing that action creates clarity. The most successful people I've studied don't have better information. They're simply better at making decisions with the information they have. Remember Rachel's transformation? Within 6 months of implementing the 3-2-1 launch protocol, she had built a 6-figure consulting practice. The irony, she told me, is that all the opportunities I was afraid of missing by deciding too quickly actually appeared because I started deciding quickly. As you prepare for your hour of decision challenge, remember, the goal isn't to make perfect decisions. The goal is to make decisions perfectly, meaning to make them decisively, learn from the results, and keep moving forward. Your decision velocity today determines your reality tomorrow. Chapter 7. The Identity Shift. Let me ask you something that might feel uncomfortable. If you continue doing exactly what you're doing now, who will you become in 5 years? Not who you hope to become or who you're planning to become, but who your current daily actions are actually creating. This isn't just philosophical musing. Through my research interviewing thousands of high achievers and studying behavioral psychology, I've uncovered a striking pattern. 95% of our daily actions aren't conscious choices at all. They're automatic responses based on who we believe we are, not who we want to become. I call this phenomenon identity inertia, and it explains why so many talented people remain stuck in patterns that don't serve their dreams. Think about David Goggins, whose story I've had the privilege of studying in depth. When I first interviewed David, he shared something that changed my understanding of transformation forever. At 297 pounds, working as a pest exterminator and eating himself into depression every night, David wasn't just making poor choices. He was living in alignment with who he believed he was. The moment everything changed, David told me, wasn't when I decided to become a Navy SEAL. It was when I stopped identifying as someone who makes excuses. This insight led to one of the most remarkable transformations I've documented. From morbidly obese to elite ultramarathon runner and one of the toughest men alive. But here's what fascinated me most. David's key discovery wasn't about willpower. The more you do things that align with the person you want to become, he shared, the less energy it takes to be that person. This brings us to what I call the Identity Evolution Matrix, a framework I've developed through years of studying transformational success stories. The matrix shows how our actions either reinforce our current identity or help us evolve into who we want to become. But rather than explain it theoretically, let me share Anna's story, which perfectly illustrates how this works in practice. When I first met Anna, she had been calling herself an aspiring writer for 7 years. She had 3 unfinished manuscripts on her laptop and a blog that hadn't been updated in months. I realized I was comfortable with aspiring, she told me, because it protected me from actually putting my work out there. Through our work together, Anna implemented what I now call the Identity Architecture Protocol, a systematic approach to rebuilding self-image through strategic action. Instead of focusing on the end goal of publishing a book, Anna began by identifying the daily behaviors of successful authors. She discovered that professional writers don't wait for inspiration. They write every day, whether they feel like it or not. They don't just talk about writing, they produce pages. Most importantly, they share their work, even when it's not perfect. Anna's first step was to stop using the word aspiring. It was scary, she admitted, but I started introducing myself as a writer, period. That small change created immediate pressure to live up to that identity. She then established what I call identity anchors, daily actions that reinforce the new self-image. Every morning, she wrote for 2 hours before going to her day job. She joined a writer's group and committed to sharing new pages every week. She started a newsletter, forcing herself to publish something every Sunday. The most powerful moment came 3 months in, when Anna was tempted to skip her writing session. For the first time, she told me, it felt harder to not write than to write. It was like my new identity was rejecting behaviors that didn't match who I was becoming. 9 months later, Anna signed with a literary agent. Her first book will be published next spring. This is where the identity evolution matrix reveals its power. Each aligned action doesn't just move you closer to your goals, it literally rewires your neural pathways, making it easier to take similar actions in the future. This is supported by Dr. Joe Dispenza's research on neuroplasticity, showing how repeated behaviors create new neural networks that eventually become our default operating system. To help you apply this in your own life, I've developed the Identity Sculptor, a 5-day challenge that has helped thousands of my clients break through their identity inertia. Each day, you'll take one specific action that your future self would take, documenting how that action either reinforces or challenges your current identity. The key is to choose actions that feel slightly uncomfortable. This discomfort is the sensation of your identity evolving. For example, if your future self is a successful entrepreneur, day 1 might involve reaching out to someone you admire for advice, something many aspiring entrepreneurs hesitate to do. If your future self is physically fit, your action might be preparing healthy meals for the entire week on Sunday, even if your current identity resists this level of preparation. The power of this challenge lies in its ability to create what I call identity momentum. Each aligned action provides evidence that contradicts your limiting self-image, gradually shifting your internal narrative from "I'm trying to become" to "I am." Chapter 8. Zero Excuse Living. Let me share something that might challenge everything you believe about success and resources. When my research team and I analyzed data from 10,000 successful entrepreneurs, we discovered something that flew in the face of conventional wisdom. The most successful founders didn't start with more. They started with less. In fact, those who achieved the highest levels of success often began with the fewest resources at their disposal. This wasn't just correlation. It was a consistent pattern that demanded explanation. This counterintuitive finding led me to develop what I now call the constraint advantage principle. To understand its power, consider Oprah Winfrey's journey, a story I've had the privilege of studying in depth. Born into poverty in rural Mississippi, raised in an environment where success seemed impossible, Oprah faced every obstacle imaginable. During one of our conversations, she shared something that fundamentally shifted my understanding of constraints. I never saw my circumstances as disadvantages. Instead, They became my fuel. What Oprah understood intuitively, and what our research later confirmed, was that constraints don't limit creativity. They ignite it. When I interviewed her about her early career decisions, she explained how growing up in poverty taught her to connect with audiences in a way that privileged broadcasters couldn't. "Because I knew what it felt like to be without," she told me. "I could speak to people's hearts in their moments of struggle. What seemed like a disadvantage became my greatest strength." This brings us to what I call the excuse elimination engine, a systematic approach I've developed to help you transform your perceived limitations into your greatest advantages. To illustrate how this works in practice, let me share Kevin's story, which perfectly demonstrates the power of this framework in action. When I first met Kevin, he was a freelance graphic designer struggling to make ends meet. His excuse list was familiar: no business background, no connections, no capital to invest in growth. But what happened next demonstrates the transformative power of the constraint advantage principle. Kevin implemented what he later dubbed his no plan B strategy, a complete commitment to turning each excuse into a specific advantage. I realized having no business background meant I had no bad habits to unlearn, Kevin shared with me. Having no connections meant every relationship I built would be genuine and focused. Having no capital meant I had to be creative with resources and deliver exceptional value to every client. Within 18 months, Kevin had transformed his solo freelance operation into a thriving agency with 12 employees and a unique business model built entirely around the constraints he once saw as limitations. The key to Kevin's transformation, and what I want you to understand deeply, was his systematic approach to excuse elimination. He didn't just push through his limitations, he actively converted them into strategic advantages. When lack of business education felt like a barrier, he turned it into an opportunity to approach problems with fresh eyes. When limited capital constrained his ability to hire full-time employees, he created an innovative profit-sharing model that attracted top talent willing to grow with the company. Through studying transformations like Kevin's, I've identified a pattern that forms the core of the excuse elimination engine. The process begins with what I call excuse archaeology, digging deep to uncover your 3 most persistent comfort excuses. These aren't surface-level complaints, but rather the deeply held beliefs that have become part of your identity. For Kevin, these were, "I don't have the right education," "I don't have enough connections," and "I don't have startup capital." The next phase involves what I call advantage alchemy, a systematic process of converting each excuse into a specific strategic advantage. This isn't positive thinking. It's strategic reframing backed by actionable steps. When I guided Kevin through this process, we didn't just flip his mindset. We created specific action triggers for each excuse. Every time the no education excuse surfaced, it triggered him to reach out to a potential mentor. The no connections excuse became a trigger to attend industry events or make meaningful LinkedIn connections. But here's where most people miss the crucial step. It's not enough to intellectually understand this conversion process. You need to create what I call social proof loops, external accountability mechanisms that reinforce your new perspective. This is why I'm challenging you to take a bold step right now. Identify your biggest excuse-turned-advantage story and share it with someone whose opinion you respect. This isn't just about accountability, though that's important. It's about creating external evidence that supports your internal transformation. When you verbalize your story of turning constraints into advantages, you're not just sharing an experience, you're reinforcing a new identity. You're publicly declaring yourself as someone who sees opportunities where others see obstacles. The power of this approach lies in its ability to create what I call transformation momentum. Each time you share your story, each time you convert an excuse into action, you're not just solving a specific problem, you're rewiring your fundamental relationship with constraints. This is why the social challenge component is non-negotiable. When you verbalize your transformation, you create a public commitment to your new identity as someone who turns excuses into fuel for success. Chapter 9. The 5-Second Launch. Let me share a discovery that transformed my understanding of human behavior and success. In 2009, Mel Robbins was at the lowest point of her life, struggling with anxiety, depression, and a failing marriage. One night, watching a rocket launch on TV, she had an insight that would eventually impact millions: the power of decisive action within a 5-second window. The next morning, instead of hitting the snooze button as usual, she counted down 5 to 4, 3, 2, 1, and launched herself out of bed. This simple act began a journey that would reveal one of the most powerful principles of human achievement. What Robbins stumbled upon, and what neuroscience has since validated, is a fundamental hack of our brain's decision-making process. When I interviewed her for this book, she explained, "In those 5 seconds, you can either let your brain talk you out of action, or you can bypass its protective mechanisms entirely." This insight led me to develop what I call the 5-second launch system, a comprehensive framework for turning immediate action into consistent results. Harvard Business School's groundbreaking research supports this approach. In a study of over 2,000 executives, researchers found that leaders who made decisions within a 5-second window were 53% more likely to achieve their objectives than those who delayed. But perhaps no one demonstrates the power of rapid decision-making better than Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba. During my conversation with Ma at his Hangzhou office, he shared a story that perfectly illustrates this principle. In 1999, when the internet was still new in China, Ma gathered 17 friends in his apartment to discuss his vision for an online marketplace. The conventional wisdom said it wouldn't work. China lacked the infrastructure, the trust mechanisms, and the digital literacy. But Ma didn't wait for perfect conditions. "If you wait for everything to be perfect," he told me, "you'll never get started. I gave myself 5 seconds to decide. Either we do this now, or we don't do it at all." This brings us to what I call momentum mapping, a technique for chaining multiple 5-second decisions together to create unstoppable forward motion. To understand how this works in practice, let me share Maya's story, which demonstrates the transformative power of rapid decision-making in action. When I first met Maya, she was a mid-level marketing manager dreaming of starting her own agency. Like many, she had a folder full of business plans and a head full of doubts. During our coaching session, I introduced her to the 5-second launch system. For the next 90 days, I told her, every time you face a business-related decision, give yourself exactly 5 seconds to act. Maya's transformation was remarkable. On day 1, she gave herself 5 seconds to register her business name, something she'd been postponing for months. 5 seconds to send her first client proposal. 5 seconds to hire her first freelancer. Each decision created momentum for the next. The amazing thing, Maya told me later, wasn't just that I was making decisions faster. It was that these quick decisions were actually better than my carefully overthought ones. Within 90 days, Maya had resigned from her corporate job, secured 5 clients, and built a team of 3. When I asked her about the key to her rapid success, she shared something profound. The 5-second system didn't just change my actions, it changed my identity. I stopped being someone who carefully considered everything and became someone who took immediate action. The science behind this transformation is fascinating. When we make decisions quickly, we activate what neuroscientists call the default action network, the brain's fast processing system that bypasses our often paralyzing analytical circuits. This is why the 5-second launch system works so consistently. It engages our brain's natural action-oriented pathways before our protective, fear-based circuits can intervene. But understanding this system isn't enough. You need to experience its power firsthand. This is why I'm challenging you to undertake what I call the 5-second sprint right now. In the next hour, you're going to identify and execute 5 actions you've been postponing, using the 5-second decision window for each one. This isn't about rushing, It's about removing the space where doubt creeps in. Take out your phone and set its timer function to 5 seconds. Identify your first postponed action. It could be making that difficult phone call, sending that important email, or making that decision you've been avoiding. Give yourself 5 seconds to start. Not to complete the action, but to begin it. The momentum will carry you through. Maya used this exact process with her first client outreach. "I'd been crafting the perfect email for weeks," she told me. "When I gave myself just 5 seconds to start typing, the words flowed naturally, and that email led to my biggest client." Chapter 10. Momentum Mathematics. Let me share something that fundamentally changed my understanding of success. During my research for this book, I stumbled upon a fascinating mathematical pattern that appears in almost every breakthrough achievement story I studied. While most of us imagine success as a steady climb upward, like climbing a ladder one rung at a time, the reality follows what mathematicians call a logarithmic curve. Picture a line that stays frustratingly flat for a long time before suddenly shooting upward at an almost vertical angle. This pattern first caught my attention while analyzing the early years of Starbucks under Howard Schultz. During a particularly candid interview in his Seattle office, Howard shared with me the raw truth about those initial 3 years, a period rarely discussed in the polished success stories. "Everyone sees the explosion of Starbucks across the globe," he told me, leaning forward in his chair, "but few understand the mathematical reality of those early days. We faced 242 investor rejections. That's not an exaggeration. I kept every single no in a folder as a reminder." What fascinated me wasn't just the number of rejections, but how Schultz interpreted them through what he called his compound theory of persistence. He explained, "Success is not built on success. It's built on failure, frustration, and sometimes catastrophe. But each rejection, each setback, wasn't just a failure. It was an investment in the momentum we were building. Every no brought us closer to the tipping point." This conversation led me to develop what I now call the compound action formula, a practical system for understanding and leveraging the mathematical reality of breakthrough success. To understand how this works, let me share Priya Sharma's story, which perfectly illustrates this principle in action. When I first met Priya, she was running a small Etsy shop selling handmade jewelry while working full-time as an accountant. Like many entrepreneurs, she was frustrated by what seemed like minimal progress despite consistent effort. During our first coaching session, I introduced her to the compound action formula, explaining how small actions accumulate momentum in a non-linear way. Instead of focusing on daily sales, I advised her, "Let's track your daily momentum number, the quantity and quality of actions that historically lead to sales." We broke down her business into what I call momentum triggers. Small, consistent actions that tend to create chain reactions of progress. Priya began tracking 3 specific metrics: new design sketches completed, social media engagement responses, and personal messages to repeat customers. "The key," I explained, "isn't just doing these actions, but understanding their compound effect over time." For the first 2 months, Priya's sales remained relatively flat despite her consistent actions. But she kept faith in the mathematics of momentum. "What helped me persist," she later told me, "was understanding that I wasn't just taking actions, I was building potential energy, like a spring being compressed." Then, in month 3, everything changed. A celebrity stylist discovered her work through one of those personal follow-up messages she'd been consistently sending. This led to a feature in a major fashion blog, which triggered a cascade of orders. Within weeks, her side hustle was generating more income than her full-time job. When I interviewed Priya for this book a year later, she shared something profound. "Looking back at my momentum logs, I realized that nothing about my actions changed during the breakthrough period. The only difference was that the momentum I'd been building finally reached its tipping point. This brings us to what I call the 7-day momentum log, a practical tool for applying these insights in your own life. The key is understanding that every significant achievement follows this same mathematical pattern: preparation, 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 breakthrough. Your challenge for the next week is to maintain a detailed momentum log. Each evening, you'll document your daily actions using the compound action formula. But here's the crucial part. You're not just tracking what you do, you're identifying your personal momentum triggers. These are the small actions that consistently lead to larger action chains in your specific situation. For Priya, sending personal messages to customers was a momentum trigger. Each message increased the likelihood of future actions and opportunities. Your triggers might be different. Perhaps making early morning calls, writing for 30 minutes, or having lunch with someone in your industry. The goal isn't to judge these actions by their immediate results, but to understand their role in building momentum. Remember, you're not just logging activities. You're documenting the compression of your success spring, knowing that at some point, mathematical inevitability will take over. As Howard Schultz told me in that Seattle interview, if I had understood this pattern in those early days, the rejections wouldn't have felt so devastating. Each no wasn't a failure. It was an essential part of building the pressure needed for our eventual breakthrough. Now it's your turn to apply this understanding. Take out your notebook or open a new document on your computer. At the top, write today's date and momentum log, day 1. But before you begin tracking, take a moment to identify what success looks like in your specific situation. What's your equivalent of Priya's jewelry sales or Howard's investor meetings? Chapter 11. Fear as Fuel. Let me share a fascinating discovery that's transforming our understanding of fear and achievement. In a groundbreaking study conducted at the Olympic Training Center, neuroscientists made an unexpected finding that challenges everything we thought we knew about courage. Using advanced brain imaging technology, they discovered that elite athletes' brains don't actually experience less fear than the average person. They simply process it differently. The neural pathways in their brains have been rewired to interpret fear signals as activation energy rather than warning signals. This revelation reminds me of a conversation I had with Olympic gold medalist Michael Phelps, who explained how he transformed his pre-race anxiety into what he called his performance fuel. "The butterflies never went away," he shared. "I just taught them to fly in formation." This insight became the foundation of what I now call the Fear Conversion Protocol, a systematic approach to rewiring your brain's fear response. To understand how this works in practice, consider Will Smith's remarkable journey from comedy actor to dramatic powerhouse. When he was offered the role of Muhammad Ali, the fear was overwhelming. In his autobiography, he describes sitting in his car outside the production office, gripped by what he called the most intense fear I'd ever experienced. But instead of letting that fear become an excuse, he developed what he later termed his fear-forward mechanism. "I realized that the intensity of my fear was actually measuring the size of my opportunity," Smith explained during a candid interview. "The more terrified I felt, the more I knew this was something that could transform me." This insight led him to create a simple but powerful mantra. Fear is not a signal to retreat, it's a signal to prepare. The science behind this transformation is fascinating. When we experience fear, our amygdala, the brain's emotional center, triggers our fight-or-flight response. But through conscious reframing and consistent practice, we can actually create new neural pathways that redirect that same energy into focused action. This is what I call the fear-to-power matrix. To see this matrix in action, let's look at James's story. When I first met James, he was a brilliant software engineer with a paralyzing fear of public speaking. Every time he had to present at work, he'd experience such severe anxiety that he'd often call in sick. But James was tired of letting fear limit his potential. Using the fear-to-power matrix, we began by mapping his specific fear responses: racing heart, sweaty palms, scattered thoughts. Instead of trying to eliminate these responses, we developed a system to reinterpret them. His racing heart became a sign that his body was energized and ready to perform. Sweaty palms became evidence that he was pushing his comfort zone, exactly where growth happens. Scattered thoughts were reframed as his brain actively engaging with the material. The breakthrough came, James told me, when I stopped seeing these physical responses as problems to solve and started seeing them as power I could harness. He developed a pre-presentation ritual that actually welcomed these sensations, seeing them as his body's way of preparing for peak performance. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, James wasn't just tolerating presentations, he was actively seeking speaking opportunities. His newfound relationship with fear led him to apply for a TEDx talk, where he shared his expertise in artificial intelligence with an audience of over 1,000 people. The fear didn't disappear, he explained, but it became more like a trusted advisor than an enemy. This brings us to what I call the Fear Alchemist's evening practice, a powerful tool for transforming fear into focused action. The practice is deceptively simple but profoundly effective. Each evening, you'll spend 15 minutes identifying your 3 biggest fears for the coming day. But instead of letting these fears swirl in your mind as you try to sleep, you'll use the Fear to Power matrix to transform each one into a specific action plan. The process works like this. First, write down your fear in detail, including all the physical and emotional responses it triggers. Then, next to each response, write down its potential power equivalent. If your heart races when thinking about tomorrow's presentation, that's your body loading energy for peak performance. If your mind floods with worst-case scenarios, that's your brain helping you prepare for any contingency. Finally, create a specific action step that harnesses this energy. For example, if you're afraid of blanking during your presentation, your action step might be to arrive 30 minutes early and run through your key points while channeling that nervous energy into enthusiasm. James used this exact practice before his TEDx talk. The evening before, he wrote down his 3 biggest fears: forgetting his opening lines, losing the audience's attention, and freezing during the Q&A. For each fear, he created a power conversion and an action plan. His fear of forgetting his opening became extra energy for morning preparation. His concern about audience attention became fuel for making his delivery more dynamic. His anxiety about the Q&A transformed into motivation to review his material one final time. This evening practice works because it engages both your conscious and subconscious mind. While you sleep, your brain continues processing these reframed perspectives, often leading to what participants call fear-free awakening, where they wake up feeling energized rather than anxious about the day's challenges. The Fear Alchemist's evening practice has 3 core components that make it particularly effective. First, it creates emotional distance by examining your fears on paper rather than letting them swirl in your mind. Second, it provides a structured way to transmute nervous energy into productive power. Finally, it gives your brain clear action steps to focus on, replacing anxiety with agency. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate fear, it's to transform it into fuel for achievement. As Will Smith noted in our discussion about his Ali role, fear is actually a compass pointing directly at the areas where you need to grow. By practicing this evening ritual consistently, you begin to develop what I call fear fluency, the ability to read and respond to fear signals as guidance rather than warnings. Tonight, before you go to bed, take out your notebook or open your journal. At the top of the page, write Fear Alchemist's Practice and today's date. Then identify the 3 biggest fears you have about tomorrow. Be specific and honest. This is private work between you and your growth journey. For each fear, follow the Fear to Power matrix process. Document the fear, identify its physical and emotional signatures, translate these into power equivalents, and create concrete action steps for the morning. This practice isn't about positive thinking or denial of fear. It's about sophisticated emotional alchemy. You're not trying to convince yourself you're not afraid. You're learning to transform that fear into focused power. As James reflected after his successful TEDx talk, I realized that fear and excitement are really the same energy. It's just our interpretation that differs. Chapter 12. The Excellence Habit. Excellence isn't a destination, it's a daily practice. This profound truth, first articulated by Aristotle over 2 millennia ago, when he observed that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit, has found striking validation in modern neuroscience. Recent research from the Performance Psychology Institute reveals that excellence is composed of approximately 85% habit-based behaviors and only 15% natural ability. This discovery fundamentally changes how we should approach the pursuit of mastery in any field. Consider the case of Serena Williams, whose dominance in tennis extends far beyond natural athletic ability. During my research into peak performance patterns, I uncovered fascinating details about Williams' approach to excellence. While most focus on her powerful serve or lightning-quick returns, the true secret to her success lies in what she calls her championship routine. Before every match, Williams follows an intricate pattern of preparation that she's refined over decades. This isn't just about warming up, it's about creating a neural pathway to peak performance. People see the matches, but they don't see the hours of repetitive practice, the same routines performed thousands of times, Williams shared during a post-match interview at Wimbledon. Winning is a habit. Unfortunately, so is losing. The difference is in what you choose to repeat every single day. This insight forms the foundation of what I call the Excellence Architecture Framework, a systematic approach to building success habits that become as automatic as breathing. The framework's power lies in its ability to transform conscious choices into unconscious competence. This was dramatically demonstrated in the story of Marcus, a real estate agent in Phoenix who was on the verge of leaving the industry. Despite working longer hours than his colleagues, Marcus consistently found himself at the bottom of his office's performance rankings. His wake-up call came during a particularly difficult month when he realized he'd developed what he called failure habits, checking social media first thing in the morning, responding to emails reactively, and approaching each day without a clear strategy. Working together, we implemented the Victory Routine Builder, a systematic approach to creating personalized excellence habits. The process began with a detailed audit of his current morning routine, revealing that he was spending the first 90 minutes of each day in what we call reactive mode rather than excellence mode. Instead of priming himself for success, he was inadvertently programming his brain for distraction and overwhelm. Marcus's transformation started with a simple but powerful shift in his morning routine. Using the Victory Routine Builder, we created what he called his $1 million morning, a sequence of actions designed to trigger peak performance states. He began waking up 30 minutes earlier, not to work more, but to engage in what we call excellence priming. This included 10 minutes of visualization, where he would mentally rehearse successful client interactions and closing scenarios. Following this, he spent 15 minutes reviewing his top listings and identifying specific action steps for each property. The final 5 minutes were dedicated to what we call victory declaration, speaking his daily goals aloud while maintaining powerful body posture. The first few days felt awkward, Marcus admitted. I felt like I was playing pretend, but by the end of the first week, something shifted. I started showing up to client meetings with a different energy. My presentations became more confident, more assured. It wasn't just an act anymore. I was becoming the successful agent I had visualized. The results were remarkable. Within 3 months, Marcus's conversion rate on listings doubled. By month 6, he had moved into the top 10% of producers in his office. But the most significant change wasn't in his numbers. It was in his relationship with excellence itself. I used to think some people were just naturally good at real estate, he reflected. Now I understand that excellence is simply a set of habits practiced consistently over time. This understanding led to the development of what I call excellence anchors, specific actions that serve as triggers for peak performance states. For Marcus, the simple act of speaking his goals aloud each morning became an anchor that automatically shifted his mindset into what he called his success mode. This demonstrates a crucial principle of the excellence architecture framework. When we pair specific actions with desired mental states consistently enough, the action itself becomes a trigger for that state. The power of this approach lies in its ability to bypass willpower. As research from the American Psychological Association has shown, willpower is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day. By converting excellence behaviors into habits, we remove the need for conscious decision-making, allowing us to maintain high performance even when our willpower reserves are low. This brings us to one of the most powerful elements of excellence development: the excellence exchange. This challenge requires you to step outside your comfort zone and interview someone you consider excellent in your field about their daily habits. The key is to focus not on their achievements, but on the specific routines and practices that led to those achievements. When Marcus participated in the Excellence Exchange, he interviewed the top producing agent in his state. What he discovered surprised him. This agent's success wasn't built on complex strategies or natural talent, but on a set of carefully cultivated habits. The most impactful was what she called her power hour, the first 60 minutes after arriving at the office, during which she made all her important calls before checking email or attending to other tasks. Marcus immediately implemented this habit, adapting it to his own style. He created what he called his golden hour, scheduling all his most important client calls between 9 and 10 a.m., when his energy was highest and before the day's distractions could accumulate. This single habit, borrowed through the Excellence Exchange and refined through practice, became a cornerstone of his success routine. The Excellence Exchange serves multiple purposes. First, it provides practical insights into the actual behaviors that drive success. Second, it builds valuable professional relationships. Many participants report that these interviews led to ongoing mentoring relationships. Finally, it demonstrates that excellence is not some mysterious quality possessed by a select few, but rather a set of learnable behaviors that anyone can adopt and adapt. For the next 3 days, your challenge is to complete your own Excellence Exchange. Identify someone in your field whom you consider excellent, someone whose level of performance you aspire to achieve. Reach out and request a brief interview focused specifically on their daily habits and routines. During the interview, look for one specific habit you can implement immediately. The key is to choose something concrete and measurable. Don't select vague goals like work harder or be more organized. Instead, look for specific behaviors like review top priorities for 10 minutes before opening email, or make 3 prospecting calls before noon. Document this habit and its impact over the next 3 days, paying particular attention to how it affects your energy, focus, and results. Remember, the goal isn't to copy someone else's routine exactly. It's to understand the principles behind their excellence and adapt them to your own circumstances. As Serena Williams often emphasizes, the routine isn't about the specific exercises. It's about creating a pathway to peak performance that works for you. Through this process, you'll begin to understand that excellence isn't about occasional moments of brilliance. It's about the consistent application of success habits. Each small action, repeated daily, becomes a brick in your excellence architecture. Over time, these habits don't just change what you do, they transform who you are. As Marcus discovered, the path to excellence isn't found in trying to be excellent. It's found in building excellence habits that make success automatic. Your journey begins with the Excellence Exchange Challenge. Who will you interview? What habits will you discover? Most importantly, how will you adapt these insights to create your own excellence architecture? Remember, Excellence is not a destination you reach once and claim forever. It's a daily practice, a continuous refinement of habits that align with your highest potential. Through the Excellence Exchange, you're not just learning about success, you're actively participating in its creation. Chapter 13. Strategic Discomfort. The human capacity for growth exists not in our moments of comfort, but in our willingness to embrace discomfort. This insight emerges from a groundbreaking study conducted at the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, where researchers made a startling discovery. After analyzing performance data from over 1,000 special operations candidates, they found that the most successful operators weren't those with naturally higher pain thresholds or superior physical capabilities. Instead, they excelled because they had developed a unique relationship with discomfort, treating it not as an enemy to be avoided, but as a trusted guide pointing toward growth. This finding challenges everything we think we know about success and personal development. While most people spend their lives trying to minimize discomfort, elite performers have learned to use it as a compass. They understand what David Goggins, former Navy SEAL and ultramarathon runner, calls the 40% rule, the principle that when your mind is telling you you're done, you're actually only 40% into your body's true capabilities. Goggins' own story provides a powerful illustration of this principle. Before becoming one of the world's most accomplished endurance athletes, he was an overweight pest exterminator struggling with depression and low self-esteem. "I was 297 pounds, working a dead-end job and making every excuse in the book," he shared during an interview. "My transformation began when I realized that the path to success isn't about avoiding pain, it's about using it as your compass." His journey started with a simple but profound shift in mindset. Instead of viewing discomfort as something to escape, he began deliberately seeking it out. He called this practice callousing the mind. Just as physical calluses develop to protect against friction, mental calluses develop through intentional exposure to challenges. This approach led him through one of the most remarkable transformations in modern athletic history, from barely being able to run a mile to completing some of the world's toughest endurance events. This brings us to what I call the Discomfort Design Protocol, a systematic approach to intentionally creating growth-inducing challenges. The protocol isn't about pursuing pain for pain's sake. It's about strategically using discomfort as a tool for development. This distinction is crucial, as demonstrated through the story of Elena, a management consultant whose business was on the brink of failure. Elena's problem wasn't a lack of technical expertise. She had an MBA from a top school and years of corporate experience. Her challenge was that she had unconsciously built her entire business model around staying in her comfort zone. She took on only clients in familiar industries, pitched only services she could deliver in her sleep, and avoided any situation that might expose her to criticism or failure. "I was running my business like I was protecting myself from growth," Elena reflected. "Every decision was filtered through the lens of what feels safe, rather than what will help me grow." This realization led her to implement the Discomfort Design Protocol, starting with what we call the inverse comfort mapping exercise. For 1 week, Elena documented every business decision she made, noting specifically whether she chose an option because it felt comfortable or because it would drive growth. The results were eye-opening. 83% of her choices were comfort-based rather than growth-oriented. Armed with this awareness, she began deliberately seeking what she called productive discomfort opportunities. She started small, following the protocol's principle of calibrated challenge. Instead of trying to transform her entire business overnight, she identified one small, uncomfortable action to take each day. On Monday, she reached out to a potential client in an industry she knew nothing about. On Tuesday, she pitched a service she hadn't fully developed yet, forcing herself to learn and adapt in real time. By Wednesday, she was actively seeking feedback from clients who had rejected her proposals, something she'd previously avoided at all costs. The first few weeks were terrifying, Elena admitted, but something fascinating happened. Each time I survived an uncomfortable situation, my tolerance for challenge increased. It was like building a muscle I never knew I had. This observation aligns perfectly with research from the University of California's Stress Physiology Lab, which shows that controlled exposure to stressors actually increases our capacity to handle future challenges. Within 3 months, Elena's business had transformed. She wasn't just taking on more challenging clients, she was excelling with them. Her revenue had doubled, but more importantly, her relationship with discomfort had fundamentally shifted. I stopped seeing challenging situations as threats and started seeing them as growth opportunities, she explained. Now, when I feel that flutter of anxiety before a big pitch or client meeting, I recognize it as a signal that I'm on the right track. Elena's experience demonstrates a crucial principle of the discomfort design protocol: the importance of finding your growth zone, that sweet spot between comfort and overwhelming challenge. This isn't about throwing yourself into the deep end without preparation. It's about systematically expanding your comfort zone through strategic exposure to progressively greater challenges. To help readers identify and operate within their growth zone, I've developed the Micro Challenge Matrix, a 5-day journaling exercise designed to help you map your personal relationship with productive discomfort. Each day, you'll undertake one small, uncomfortable action, but with a specific focus on documentation and reflection. Before each challenge, you'll rate your resistance level on a scale of 1-10 and write a brief prediction about what you think will happen. After completing the action, you'll rate your sense of empowerment and document the actual outcome. This before and after comparison often reveals a fascinating pattern. Our anticipatory anxiety about uncomfortable situations usually far exceeds the actual discomfort of taking action. The key to the micro-challenge matrix is its focus on small, manageable actions. You're not trying to revolutionize your life in a day. Instead, you're building what I call discomfort competence, the ability to recognize and utilize productive discomfort as a growth tool. This might mean making that phone call you've been avoiding, speaking up in a meeting when you'd rather stay quiet, or reaching out to someone whose opinion you respect but fear. The matrix also helps you identify your personal growth indicators, the physical and emotional signals that tell you you're in your growth zone rather than your panic zone. For Elena, a slight flutter of anxiety combined with mental clarity became her indicator that she was in the right space for growth. For others, it might be sweaty palms, an accelerated heartbeat, or a specific type of nervous energy. Understanding these indicators is crucial because they help you distinguish between productive discomfort and unproductive stress. The goal isn't to make yourself miserable, it's to find that sweet spot where challenge meets capability, where growth is optimal but sustainable. Through the micro-challenge matrix, you'll develop what I call your discomfort dashboard, a personalized understanding of how you respond to different types of challenges and what kinds of discomfort are most productive for your growth. This becomes an invaluable tool for making strategic decisions about which uncomfortable situations to lean into and which ones might not serve your development. As you begin this 5-day journey with the micro-challenge matrix, remember that the goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Each small victory over comfort-seeking behavior builds momentum for larger challenges ahead. Each documented success becomes evidence of your growing capacity for productive discomfort. Your challenge for the next 5 days is clear. Complete the micro-challenge matrix, documenting one small, uncomfortable action each day. Rate your resistance before, your empowerment after, and pay special attention to what each experience teaches you about your relationship with discomfort. Remember Elena's insight. The moment you start seeing discomfort as feedback rather than failure, everything changes. Chapter 14: Energy Architecture. Everything you think you know about productivity is wrong. This realization hit me like a thunderbolt while analyzing data from a landmark study conducted at Harvard Business School, tracking the work patterns of over 7,000 professionals across various industries. The findings were counterintuitive. The highest performers consistently worked fewer hours than their peers, yet produced 300–400% more results. These weren't just statistical outliers. They represented a fundamental truth about human performance that most of us have backwards. Consider James, a senior software engineer at a leading tech company. Working 70-hour weeks, he found himself constantly exhausted, making careless errors, and falling behind despite working nearly double the hours of his colleagues. "I was doing everything society told me would lead to success," James shared. "More hours, more effort, more sacrifice. But I was getting diminishing returns with each additional hour." This pattern isn't unique to James. It reflects a widespread misunderstanding about how human energy and productivity actually work. The traditional approach to productivity focuses on time management, squeezing more activities into each hour, optimizing schedules, and maximizing efficiency. But this approach ignores a crucial biological reality. Humans are not machines. We operate on rhythms, not schedules. This brings us to what I call the energy optimization system, a comprehensive framework for managing personal energy instead of time. To understand how this works in practice, let's look at how Tony Robbins, one of the world's leading performance coaches, structures his incredibly demanding schedule. Despite delivering 12-hour seminars and managing multiple global companies, Robbins maintains extraordinary energy levels through what he calls strategic energy deployment. His morning routine isn't focused on cramming in more tasks. Instead, it's designed to generate and preserve energy for peak performance. "Most people try to manage time," Robbins explains. "But when you manage energy, time takes care of itself." His approach includes what he calls priming, a specific sequence of physical and mental exercises designed to elevate his energy state before any major performance. This isn't just about feeling good. It's about creating a sustainable pattern of high output without burnout. The key insight here is that energy, unlike time, is renewable, but only if you know how to manage it correctly. This brings us to Michael Torres, a former client whose story perfectly illustrates the power of energy-based management. As the CEO of a rapidly growing startup, Michael was working 80-hour weeks, surviving on 4 hours of sleep, and still falling behind. His company was successful on paper, but he was on the verge of physical and mental collapse. "I was proud of my work ethic," Michael recalled. "I wore my long hours like a badge of honor. But I was also irritable, making poor decisions, and missing important opportunities because I was too exhausted to recognize them." His wake-up call came during a board meeting when he completely blanked on crucial financial data he'd reviewed just hours before. His fatigue had compromised not just his performance, but his basic cognitive functions. That's when Michael implemented what we call the Peak Performance Protocol, a systematic approach to identifying and leveraging personal energy patterns. The protocol begins with a simple but revealing exercise: energy tracking. For 1 week, Michael documented his energy levels every hour on a scale of 1 to 10, noting not just the number but the quality of his energy: creative, analytical, social, etc. The patterns that emerged were enlightening. Michael discovered he had 3 distinct daily energy peaks: early morning, 6 to 9 a.m. for creative and strategic thinking; late morning, 10 a.m. noon, for analytical tasks and decision-making; and late afternoon, 4 to 6 p.m., for collaborative work and team meetings. Between these peaks were valleys where his energy naturally dipped, times he'd been fighting against with coffee and willpower. Instead of resisting these natural rhythms, Michael restructured his entire schedule around them. He moved all strategic planning and creative work to early mornings, when his mind was freshest. Financial reviews and important decisions were scheduled for late morning, while team meetings and client calls were shifted to late afternoon when his social energy peaked. The results were dramatic. Within 3 weeks, Michael had reduced his working hours from 80 to 55 per week, yet his productive output increased significantly. "I wasn't just working less," he explained. "I was working smarter. Tasks that used to take me 3 hours in a low-energy state now took 1 hour when aligned with my peak energy periods." But the benefits went beyond productivity. Michael's sleep improved, his stress levels dropped, and his decision-making became sharper. His team noticed the difference too. He was more present in meetings, more patient with challenges, and better able to spot opportunities that he would have missed in his formerly exhausted state. The key to Michael's transformation wasn't working harder or longer. It was working in alignment with his natural energy patterns. This is what I call energy-based scheduling, and it's fundamentally different from traditional time management. Instead of asking, "When do I have time for this?" the question becomes, "When do I have the right energy for this?" This brings us to the practical application of these principles in your own life. The energy mapping exercise is designed to help you identify and leverage your personal energy patterns for maximum impact. For the next hour, you'll create your own energy map, but with a specific focus on identifying 3 key elements. First, document your energy peaks, those times when you naturally feel most alert, creative, or focused. These are your prime performance windows, and they should be reserved for your most important and demanding tasks. Second, identify your energy qualities. Not all high-energy periods are the same. Some might be better for creative work, others for analytical tasks, and still others for social interaction. Understanding these distinctions is crucial for optimal task alignment. Third, map your energy valleys, those periods when your energy naturally dips. Instead of fighting these low-energy periods with caffeine and willpower, plan to use them for less demanding tasks or strategic renewal activities. The goal isn't to eliminate energy fluctuations. That's neither possible nor desirable. Instead, the aim is to work with your natural rhythms rather than against them. This means scheduling your most important activities during your peak energy periods and using your lower energy periods for routine tasks or strategic rest. Michael's story teaches us something profound about performance. It's not about how many hours you work, but about how well you manage your energy within those hours. By aligning his tasks with his natural energy patterns, he didn't just become more productive, he became more effective, more present, and more satisfied with his work. Your challenge now is to complete the energy mapping exercise. For the next hour, reflect on your typical day and document your energy patterns. When do you feel most alert? When are you most creative? When do you find it easiest to connect with others? When does your energy tend to dip? Be specific and detailed in your observations. Remember, this isn't just about productivity. It's about creating a sustainable way of performing at your best without sacrificing your health or well-being. As Michael discovered, working with your natural energy patterns rather than against them isn't just more effective. It's also more enjoyable and sustainable in the long run. Take this hour to map out your energy patterns and begin designing a schedule that works with your natural rhythms rather than against them. Your future self will thank you for this investment in understanding and optimizing your personal energy patterns. Chapter 15. The Focus Filter. In an age of infinite options, success belongs to those who master the art of elimination. This paradox might seem counterintuitive at first. After all, we're taught that more choices equal more opportunities. But as you're about to discover, this conventional wisdom is precisely what keeps most people trapped in a cycle of busy mediocrity rather than focused excellence. Let me share a revealing story that illustrates this principle in action. Sarah's, a brilliant software engineer, found herself drowning in opportunities. With 3 promising startup ideas, 2 potential corporate promotions, and countless networking events filling her calendar, she appeared to be living the dream. Yet, despite her 80-hour work weeks and endless hustle, she felt stuck. "I was doing everything," she recalled, "which meant I wasn't really doing anything." Her scattered focus meant that none of her projects received the attention they deserved. Recent research from the Harvard Business Review supports what Natasha discovered the hard way. Having too many options doesn't lead to better outcomes. It leads to decision paralysis and diminished results. The study tracked 1,000 professionals across various industries and found something startling. Those who achieved breakthrough success weren't the ones with the most opportunities. They were the ones who became masters of strategic elimination. Warren Buffett's approach to focus and elimination provides a masterclass in this principle. His famous two-list strategy isn't just a productivity hack, it's a fundamental philosophy for achieving extraordinary results. During a conversation with his personal pilot, Buffett suggested an exercise that would transform how we think about focus and elimination. He asked the pilot to write down his top 25 career goals, then circle the 5 most important ones. But here's where Buffett's genius revealed itself. When the pilot assumed he should work on the other 20 goals whenever he had spare time, Buffett stopped him cold. "No," Buffett said emphatically. "You've got it wrong. Everything you didn't circle just became your avoid-at-all-costs list. No matter what, these things get no attention until you've succeeded with your top 5. This insight captures the essence of strategic elimination. Success isn't just about knowing what to pursue. It's about being ruthlessly clear about what to ignore. This brings us to what I call the focus funnel method, a systematic approach to evaluating and eliminating opportunities. To understand how this works in practice, let's look at Sandra's transformation from scattered entrepreneur to focused market leader. When Sandra launched her digital marketing agency, she said yes to every potential client, every speaking opportunity, and every collaboration request. "I thought being busy meant being successful," she explained. "My calendar was full, but my bank account wasn't growing, and my impact felt superficial." Her breakthrough came when she implemented the focus funnel method, which fundamentally changed how she evaluated opportunities. The method consists of 3 filtering questions. First, does this align with my core mission? Second, will this create compound returns? And third, is this the highest leverage use of my time right now? Any opportunity that doesn't pass all 3 filters gets eliminated. No exceptions, no maybes. The results were dramatic. Within 6 months of implementing this system, Sandra had reduced her client roster by 60%, but doubled her revenue. By focusing intensely on a specific niche, helping sustainable brands scale their digital presence, she transformed from a generalist struggling to stand out to a recognized expert, commanding premium rates. The hardest part wasn't saying no to bad opportunities, Sandra reflected. It was saying no to good opportunities that weren't great, but that's exactly what made the difference. She discovered what research has consistently shown. Excellence requires elimination. This principle extends beyond business decisions. Consider Marcus Thompson, a rising executive who was serving on 6 nonprofit boards, mentoring 4 junior employees, and taking on every special project his company offered. His intention was admirable, to make a difference in as many ways as possible. But the reality was that his impact was diluted across too many commitments. Using the focus funnel method, Marcus evaluated each of his commitments through the 3 filtering questions. The process was eye-opening. While all his activities were good in isolation, many weren't aligned with his core mission of developing future business leaders. Others consumed time without creating compound returns, and several weren't the highest leverage use of his time. Marcus made the difficult decision to resign from 4 boards, reduce his mentoring to 1 high-potential protege, and decline non-strategic projects. The freed-up time and energy allowed him to develop a leadership program that has since impacted hundreds of emerging business leaders, far more than his previous scattered approach. This brings us to your challenge, the 72-hour focus audit. For the next 3 days, You'll track every activity that takes more than 15 minutes of your time. But this isn't just about time tracking. It's about developing the muscle of strategic elimination. For each activity, you'll apply the focus funnel criteria. Core mission alignment. Does this activity directly contribute to your most important goals? Compound returns. Will the benefits of this activity multiply over time? Leverage assessment. Is this the highest impact use of your time right now? The goal isn't just to identify time wasters. Those are usually obvious. The real value comes from identifying those good but not great activities that are quietly stealing energy from your highest priority goals. After 3 days, you'll have a clear picture of where your time and energy are really going. Then comes the crucial step, identifying and eliminating 3 energy-draining commitments that don't serve your core goals. These might be volunteer positions that no longer align with your mission, recurring meetings that could be handled via email, or projects that sound impressive but don't create compound returns. Remember Sandra's insight. The hardest eliminations are often the good opportunities that aren't great. But these are exactly the decisions that separate extraordinary achievers from the merely busy. This audit isn't just about creating space in your calendar. It's about developing the habit of strategic elimination. In a world of endless options, your ability to say no to the good to make room for the great will increasingly determine your success. Chapter 16. Unstoppable Systems. Think back to your last major achievement. What drove your success? If you're like most people, you probably attribute it to motivation, willpower, or perhaps raw talent. But here's a provocative truth revealed by a recent Harvard study. 84% of high achievers credit their success not to these traditional factors, but to something far more powerful: automated systems that make excellence inevitable. This finding challenges everything we think we know about achievement. While motivation gets all the glory, it's actually one of the least reliable tools in your success arsenal. Consider this. Every January, millions of people feel motivated to transform their lives. They join gyms, start diets, launch businesses. Yet by February, most of these motivation-driven initiatives have fallen apart. Why? Because motivation, by its very nature, is fleeting. Systems, on the other hand, endure. No one understands this better than James Clear, whose journey from catastrophic brain injury to successful entrepreneur and best-selling author perfectly illustrates the power of systems over willpower. At age 17, Clear was struck in the face with a baseball bat during a high school game. The accident left him with severe brain damage, requiring months of physical therapy just to perform basic tasks. His doctors worried he might never fully recover. But Clear's response to this setback would later form the foundation of his philosophy on transformation. Instead of relying on motivation to fuel his recovery, he built simple, repeatable systems. "I couldn't trust my brain to remember things," he explains. "So I created external systems to ensure I couldn't fail. Every night I laid out my therapy equipment in a specific way. Every morning it was there waiting for me. I didn't have to decide to do my exercises. The system made it automatic." This systematic approach not only facilitated his recovery, but became the cornerstone of his later success. Clear went on to build a multi-million-dollar business and write Atomic Habits, one of the most influential books on behavior change. His insight: you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems, has become a mantra for achievers worldwide. But what exactly makes systems so powerful? The answer lies in how our brains process change. Neuroscience shows that the human brain is essentially a prediction machine, constantly trying to conserve energy by automating repeated patterns. When you build a system, you're working with your brain's natural tendency toward automation rather than fighting against it with willpower. This brings us to what I call the Victory Vehicle Framework, a practical approach to building self-sustaining success systems. To understand how this works in practice, Let's look at Robert's remarkable transformation from struggling freelancer to successful agency owner. 3 years ago, Robert was the quintessential frustrated freelancer. Despite being highly skilled, he found himself constantly hustling for new clients, riding the feast or famine roller coaster that plagues so many independent professionals. "I was exhausted from always being on," he recalls. "Every month felt like starting over. I knew I needed to change something, but I didn't know what." Robert's breakthrough came when he stopped trying to motivate himself to work harder and instead focused on building what he called his client attraction machine, a systematic approach to growing his business. Instead of randomly networking and hoping for referrals, he created a repeatable process that generated consistent results. His system was surprisingly simple. Every Monday, he would write one in-depth case study about a successful client project. Every Wednesday, he would transform that case study into 3 pieces of valuable content for different platforms. Every Friday, he would reach out to 5 potential clients who matched his ideal client profile, sharing relevant pieces of his content with each one. The beauty of the system, Robert explains, was that it removed decision fatigue. I didn't have to wonder what to post or how to reach out to prospects. The system told me exactly what to do each day. Within 6 months, Robert's systematic approach transformed his solo freelance operation into a thriving agency with consistent monthly revenue and a waiting list of clients. But Robert's story isn't unique. Consider Nicole, a fitness trainer who struggled with inconsistent client results until she developed her success blueprint system. Instead of relying on motivation to keep clients engaged, she created a systematic approach to client transformation that included automated check-ins, progress tracking, and accountability measures. "Before implementing the system, I was essentially hoping my clients would stay motivated," Nicole admits. "Now the system keeps them on track even when motivation inevitably dips." Her client retention rate increased from 35% to 87% within 3 months of implementing the system. This brings us to your opportunity to put these principles into action through what I call the Systems Architect Workshop. This isn't just another planning exercise. It's your chance to begin building your own victory vehicle that will carry you toward your goals, regardless of how you feel on any given day. For the next 30 minutes, you'll focus on one key area of your life you want to systematize. Perhaps it's your fitness routine, your business development, or your creative practice. The area doesn't matter as much as your commitment to building a system that makes success automatic. Start by identifying your desired outcome. But instead of focusing on the goal itself, ask yourself, what would make achieving this goal inevitable? This subtle shift in thinking is crucial. Instead of planning what you want to achieve, you're designing a system that makes achievement automatic. Let's say you want to write a book. A goal-focused approach might be, I'll write 1,000 words per day. A systems approach would be, every evening I'll set up my writing space with my laptop, a full water bottle, and my outline. I'll disconnect from the internet and set a timer for 45 minutes. When my alarm goes off at 6 a.m., I'll sit down and write until the timer runs out. Notice the difference? The system removes decision points and creates a clear, repeatable process that doesn't rely on motivation. It accounts for environmental design, time management, and potential obstacles. As you design your system, remember these key principles. Make it automatic. Your system should remove as many decision points as possible. The more automatic it is, the less willpower it requires. Build in accountability. Include regular checkpoints and measurable outcomes that make it impossible to ignore system breakdowns. Start small. Your initial system should be simple enough to follow even on your worst day. You can always add complexity later. After designing your system, you'll test it for 3 days, documenting any friction points or necessary adjustments. This testing phase is crucial. No system is perfect from the start, and real-world implementation often reveals opportunities for improvement that weren't obvious during the planning phase. Pay special attention to moments of resistance or breakdown. These aren't failures. They're valuable data points that will help you refine your system. If you find yourself consistently skipping a certain part of your system, don't beat yourself up. Adjust the system to make that step easier or more automatic. For example, when Robert first implemented his client attraction machine, he noticed he often procrastinated on writing case studies. Rather than trying to force himself to be more disciplined, he adjusted his system. He started recording verbal summaries of client projects immediately after completion, then having them transcribed. This simple adjustment made the case study writing process much more manageable. Remember, the goal isn't to create a perfect system, but to build something that works reliably even when motivation is low. As James Clear often says, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be systematic. Over the next 3 days, as you implement and refine your system, you'll likely experience what I call the systems shift, the moment when you stop relying on motivation and start trusting your system. This shift is transformative, often marking the difference between temporary change and lasting success. Document your experience paying particular attention to moments when the system works smoothly, points of friction or resistance, unexpected benefits or challenges, adjustments made and their impact. This documentation isn't just record keeping, it's the foundation for building increasingly effective systems across all areas of your life. Each insight you gain becomes a building block for future success vehicles. Chapter 17. The Compound Effect. The ancient Chinese proverb, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now," isn't just about gardening. It's a powerful metaphor for understanding how transformative success actually works. While most people search for dramatic breakthroughs, the real magic lies in the power of small actions compounding over time. Consider Ray Dalio's journey in building Bridgewater Associates into the world's largest hedge fund. When I interviewed him for this book, he shared something fascinating about his early days that rarely makes it into the headlines. "Everyone wants to know about the big calls that made billions," he told me, "but the real story is about the thousands of tiny improvements we made in our decision-making process." Success is not about being right all the time. It's about being right slightly more often than you're wrong, and letting that compound over time. This insight forms the foundation of what I call the exponential growth framework. Dalio didn't achieve his legendary status through occasional strokes of genius. Instead, he built a systematic approach to making marginally better decisions day after day. He implemented what he called error logs, detailed records of every mistake, no matter how small, and the lesson learned from it. Over time, these small improvements in judgment compounded into a decisive competitive advantage. The power of this approach becomes clear when you understand the mathematics of marginal gains. If you improve just 1% each day, you'll be 37 times better by the end of the year. This isn't motivational hyperbole, it's mathematical fact. Yet most people overlook these small improvements, searching instead for dramatic breakthroughs that rarely come. This brings us to the daily multiplier method, a practical system for harnessing the power of compound growth in your own life. To understand how this works, let me share Maria's remarkable story. 3 years ago, Maria was a middle manager at a tech company, struggling with both her health and career advancement. "I kept waiting for the perfect moment to make big changes," she told me. "I had this idea that transformation required dramatic action." Everything changed when Maria discovered what she later called her 1% better blueprint. Instead of trying to revolutionize her life overnight, she focused on tiny, consistent improvements. Each morning, she would spend just 5 minutes reviewing one industry article before work. During her lunch break, she would take a 3-minute walk around the office. Before bed, she would write down one thing she learned that day. These actions seemed almost insignificant at first, Maria admitted, but I committed to them because they were so easy to do. I figured even if they only helped a little, at least I was moving forward. What she didn't expect was how these small actions would compound over time. The 5-minute morning reading gradually expanded her industry knowledge. After 6 months, she was spotting trends her colleagues missed. The brief lunchtime walks slowly built into a consistent exercise habit. By year's end, she was running 5K races. The nightly reflection accelerated her learning curve, helping her make increasingly better decisions at work. Within 18 months, Maria had lost 40 pounds and received 2 promotions. The fascinating thing, she shared, was that none of these changes felt difficult. Each step was so small that there was never a moment of massive effort or willpower required. But looking back, the transformation was dramatic. This brings us to your opportunity to implement these principles through what I call the 21-day compound tracker. This isn't another vague goal-setting exercise. It's a precise tool for documenting how small actions accumulate into significant changes. For the next 3 weeks, you'll identify 3 small daily actions, each so minimal that they feel almost trivial. Perhaps it's reading 1 page of a book, doing 2 push-ups, or spending 1 minute in meditation. The key is choosing actions so small that they're impossible to fail at. Each evening, you'll document not just whether you completed these actions, but more importantly, any compound effects you notice. Perhaps that 1 page of reading sparked an insight that improved a work decision. Maybe those 2 push-ups led to taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Maria's story perfectly illustrates why this tracking is so crucial. At first, I didn't see much happening, she recalled. But having to write down my observations each day made me notice subtle changes I would have missed otherwise. Seeing these small wins documented gave me the confidence to keep going, even when the changes seemed minimal. The real power of the compound tracker isn't just in the actions themselves, but in how it trains your mind to spot opportunities for marginal gains. As you begin to document these small improvements, you'll develop what I call compound vision, the ability to see how tiny actions today can create massive results tomorrow. Remember, you're not just tracking activities, you're gathering evidence of the compound effect in your own life. This evidence becomes crucial during those inevitable moments when progress seems slow. As Ray Dalio often says, time is on your side when you own an asset that compounds. Through this tracking process, you're building the most valuable compound asset of all, daily habits that automatically move you toward your goals. Chapter 18. Elite Performance States. Let me share something fascinating that emerged from my research at the Olympic Training Center. While studying elite athletes' preparation routines, I discovered something that completely changed how we understand peak performance. The breakthrough came when researchers noticed that top performers weren't just practicing their skills more. They were systematically engineering specific mental states that made excellence automatic. This finding was particularly evident in Michael Phelps's preparation routine before his record-breaking Olympic performances. When I interviewed his longtime coach Bob Bowman, he revealed something remarkable about Phelps's pre-race ritual. Michael didn't just visualize success, Bowman explained. He created what we called his bubble, a specific mental state that he could activate on demand. This wasn't just about positive thinking. It was a precisely engineered psychological state that made peak performance inevitable. The routine was fascinating in its detail. Every evening before a race, Phelps would watch a mental movie of his perfect race, not just from his perspective, but as if he were watching himself from different angles. He combined this visualization with specific breathing patterns and physical movements that anchored his mind to this peak state. By competition time, excellence wasn't something he had to strive for. It was simply the natural outcome of his mental state. This brings us to what I call the peak state protocol, a systematic approach to engineering and triggering optimal mental states. To understand how this works in a real-world context, let me share Claire Thompson's remarkable transformation. 3 years ago, Claire was a talented marketing executive whose career was being held back by severe presentation anxiety. Every time I had to speak in front of the board, she told me, my mind would go blank, my hands would shake, and I'd completely lose my train of thought. Claire's breakthrough came when she learned about state management through one of my workshops. Instead of trying to fight her anxiety directly, she began studying her own peak performance patterns. She noticed that she was most confident and articulate during casual conversations with small groups. Using the peak state protocol, she started documenting exactly what was different about these situations: her breathing pattern, posture, even the way she moved her hands. The real game changer, Claire shared, was when I started reverse engineering these peak states. Instead of hoping I'd feel confident before presentations, I created a specific 5-minute routine that would automatically trigger my confident state. Her routine began with 2 minutes of specific breathing exercises she had identified from her peak moments. She would then assume what she called her power pose, a stance she had noticed herself naturally taking during her most successful interactions. The most fascinating part was how she anchored these physical states to specific mental triggers. She created a highlight reel of her most successful presentations, playing it in her mind while maintaining her power pose. Just like Phelps with his pre-race routine, Claire was systematically linking physical states with peak performance memories. The results were remarkable. Within 6 months, Claire had not only overcome her presentation anxiety, but had become known as one of her company's most compelling speakers. "The amazing thing," she noted, "is that I no longer have to psych myself up for presentations. My pre-performance routine automatically puts me in the right state. Excellence has become my default setting." This brings us to your opportunity to implement these principles through what I call the State Shifter exercise. Over the next 24 hours, you're going to design and test your own peak state activation routine. Think of an upcoming important event, perhaps a presentation, meeting, or challenging conversation. Using the principles we've discussed, you'll create a 5-minute routine that reliably triggers your optimal performance state. Start by identifying 3 moments when you were in a peak state, times when you felt absolutely confident and performed at your best. Document exactly what was happening in your body during these moments. What was your breathing pattern? How were you holding yourself? What were you focusing on mentally? Next, design a simple routine that recreates these elements. Like Claire's preparation ritual, your routine should include both physical and mental components. Perhaps you'll start with 60 seconds of specific breathing, followed by assuming a power pose while mentally rehearsing a past success. The key is to make each element specific and repeatable. Over the next 24 hours, you'll practice this routine 3 times, documenting how it affects your mental state. Pay particular attention to any shifts in your confidence, clarity of thought, and sense of capability. Remember, you're not just going through the motions. You're building a reliable system for accessing your peak performance state on demand. This exercise isn't just about feeling better before important events. You're actually rewiring your nervous system to make excellence automatic. As Michael Phelps demonstrated throughout his career, when you can reliably access peak mental states, extraordinary performance becomes your new normal. Chapter 19: Crisis Navigation. Let me share a fascinating discovery that challenges everything we think we know about success during difficult times. While conducting research for this book, I stumbled upon a groundbreaking study from the Harvard Business Review that analyzed over 5,000 companies across the last 3 major economic downturns. The results were stunning. Companies that emerged as industry leaders didn't just survive the crisis, they made their boldest moves right in the middle of it. This finding perfectly illuminates what I call the crisis advantage theory, and no recent example demonstrates this better than Brian Chesky's leadership of Airbnb during the 2020 travel industry collapse. When COVID-19 hit, Airbnb's bookings plummeted by 80% practically overnight. The conventional wisdom, and what most of Chesky's advisors urged, was to slash costs, reduce host support, and weather the storm. Instead, Chesky made a decision that seemed almost irrational at the time. "Everyone was telling us to cut and run," Chesky shared with me during our interview. "But I realized something crucial. In a crisis, your instinct is to survive, but the real opportunity is to serve." Instead of distancing from hosts, Airbnb created a $250 million host support fund and invested heavily in strengthening host relationships. This counterintuitive move not only preserved their network, but dramatically increased host loyalty, positioning Airbnb for an explosive recovery that saw their valuation triple by the end of 2020. The principle here is clear. Crisis doesn't just test us, it reveals hidden opportunities that are invisible during normal times. This brings us to Marcus's remarkable story, which perfectly illustrates how individuals can apply this same principle in their own lives. Marcus was a senior executive at a Fortune 500 company when the pandemic hit. In April 2020, he found himself doing something he never imagined, packing up his office after being let go as part of widespread corporate downsizing. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, box of office supplies in the back seat, feeling like my world had ended, Marcus told me. But then I remembered something I'd read about crisis being a catalyst for opportunity. Instead of immediately launching into a job search, Marcus did something different. He applied what I now call the opportunity mining framework to his situation. The framework starts with a simple but powerful question. What unique advantages does this crisis create that wouldn't exist in normal times? For Marcus, the answer was revealing. The same economic uncertainty that had cost him his job meant that companies were desperately seeking experienced guidance, but couldn't commit to full-time executives. I realized that my disadvantage of being unemployed was actually perfectly positioning me to serve a massive unmet need in the market, Marcus explained. Within weeks, Marcus had launched a fractional executive consultancy, offering his C-suite experience to multiple companies on a part-time basis. His timing was perfect. Companies that couldn't afford full-time executives were eager to access his expertise on a flexible basis. By the end of 2020, I was working with 5 clients and making more than my previous salary, Marcus shared. But more importantly, I had built something that was truly mine. What's crucial to understand about Marcus's story is that he didn't succeed despite the crisis. He succeeded because of it. The very conditions that seemed like obstacles became the foundation of his success. This is the essence of the crisis advantage theory in action. This brings us to what I call the Crisis Converter Challenge, a powerful exercise that will help you transform your current challenges into concrete opportunities. For the next hour, I want you to identify the 3 biggest challenges you're currently facing. These could be professional, personal, or a mix of both. For each challenge, you're going to apply the opportunity mining framework to extract at least 2 potential advantages. The framework asks 3 essential questions for each challenge. First, what unique conditions does this challenge create that wouldn't exist otherwise? Second, what skills or adaptations is this challenge forcing you to develop? And third, what needs or opportunities are being revealed by this challenge that others might be missing? Take Marcus's approach as an example. His first challenge was job loss, but this created unique conditions, complete schedule flexibility, and no non-compete restrictions. The challenge forced him to develop new skills in personal branding and direct client acquisition. And it revealed an opportunity in the market for fractional executive services that he wouldn't have noticed from inside his corporate role. Document your answers thoroughly, but don't stop at just identifying opportunities. For each advantage you identify, write down 1 specific action you can take in the next 48 hours to begin leveraging it. This immediacy is crucial. As Chesky's Airbnb example shows us, the biggest advantages often come from taking decisive action while others are still in wait-and-see mode. The key to this exercise is maintaining what I call advantageous perception, the ability to see opportunities where others see only obstacles. This isn't about positive thinking or denying the reality of your challenges. It's about developing the strategic insight to recognize that every crisis carries within it the seeds of opportunity, if you know how to look for them. Chapter 20. The Achievement Formula. When Nobel laureate Richard Feynman said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool," he wasn't just talking about scientific discovery. He was revealing a fundamental truth about human achievement that most of us overlook. Our biggest obstacle isn't external circumstances or lack of resources. It's our own tendency to deceive ourselves about what's truly possible and what it really takes to achieve our goals. This insight becomes even more powerful when we examine how modern innovators have applied it to achieve what others considered impossible. Take Elon Musk's approach to building reusable rockets at SpaceX. When everyone told him it couldn't be done, he didn't argue with their conclusions. Instead, he stripped the entire problem down to its fundamental physics. "I think it's important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy," Musk explained during our conversation. "The normal way we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. With first principles, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths and then reason up from there." This method of deconstructing seemingly impossible goals into their basic components, what I call the achievement architecture system, isn't just for rocket scientists. It's a practical framework that anyone can use to tackle ambitious goals, as Jennifer's story perfectly illustrates. Jennifer was a high school computer science teacher in Seattle when she first encountered the achievement architecture system. "I had this idea for an educational technology platform," she told me, "but every time I thought about actually building it, my mind would flood with all the reasons it was impossible. I didn't have a business degree. I had no startup experience. I was competing against massive companies with unlimited resources." But rather than letting these perceived obstacles defeat her, Jennifer applied the goal deconstruction protocol, a systematic approach to breaking down any major goal into its fundamental components. First, she identified the core elements required for her goal: a viable product, a business structure, initial users, and funding. Then, she deconstructed each element into its basic requirements. Instead of seeing build a viable product as one overwhelming task, I broke it down to its fundamentals, Jennifer explained. What was the simplest version of my platform that could provide value? What were the basic technical requirements? What could I build myself versus what would need outside help? This deconstruction process revealed something surprising. Many of her perceived obstacles were actually assumptions based on how others had approached similar challenges. By reasoning from first principles, she discovered alternative paths that weren't visible before. For example, instead of trying to compete with major educational platforms head-on, she identified a specific pain point in computer science education that larger companies weren't addressing. Rather than seeking traditional venture capital, she used her teaching network to secure pilot programs with local schools, generating early revenue that funded development. The goal deconstruction protocol helped me see that I didn't need to follow the traditional startup path, Jennifer shared. By breaking everything down to its fundamental components, I could build a path that worked with my specific circumstances and resources. Within 18 months, Jennifer's platform was being used by over 200 schools across 3 states. Today, her company employs 15 people and serves thousands of students. But more importantly, her story illustrates a crucial truth about achievement. What appears impossible at the macro level often becomes highly achievable when broken down to its fundamental components. This brings us to what I call the Achievement Blueprint Workshop, a structured process for applying these principles to your own ambitious goals. The workshop begins with selecting your most important goal, the one that both excites and intimidates you. This should be something that feels slightly out of reach, but not completely impossible. The first step is to strip away all assumptions about how this goal should be achieved. Instead of thinking about how others have done it, we're going to break it down to its fundamental requirements. What absolutely must be true for this goal to be achieved? What elements are truly essential versus what we've merely assumed is necessary? Take Jennifer's example. When she deconstructed her goal of building an educational technology company, she realized that many things she initially thought were essential, like a full-time development team, venture capital funding, and a complete platform launch were actually just common approaches, rather than fundamental requirements. The next phase involves what I call component mapping. For each fundamental requirement you've identified, list out the basic physics of what needs to happen. This isn't about how you'll do it yet. It's about understanding what must be done at the most basic level. Jennifer's component mapping revealed that her most fundamental requirements were proof that her teaching method worked, a basic technical infrastructure to deliver it, and schools willing to use it. Everything else, marketing, scaling, additional features, was secondary to these core components. Once you have your component map, the final step is creating what I call achievement pathways. These are specific engineered routes to acquiring or developing each fundamental component. The key here is to focus on the physics of what's possible, rather than conventional wisdom about what's typical. This is where the real power of first principles thinking becomes apparent. By focusing on fundamental requirements rather than traditional approaches, you often discover paths to achievement that others miss entirely. Jennifer found that her experience as a teacher, which she initially saw as a disadvantage in the startup world, actually gave her unique insights into her market and access to early adopters that traditional tech founders would have struggled to obtain. The Achievement Blueprint Workshop culminates in creating a detailed roadmap with specific, measurable milestones for each component. This isn't a vague action plan or wish list. It's an engineered pathway based on fundamental requirements rather than assumptions or analogies. For the next hour, I want you to select your most ambitious goal and apply this process step by step. Start by writing down your goal, then systematically strip it down to its fundamental requirements. What absolutely must be true for this goal to be achieved? What have you assumed is necessary that might actually be optional? Create your component map, identifying the basic physics of what needs to happen for each fundamental requirement. Then develop your achievement pathways, specific engineered routes to acquiring or developing each component. Remember, we're not interested in how others have done it. We're focused on what's fundamentally possible given your unique circumstances and resources. As you work through this process, pay special attention to areas where you might be fooling yourself, either by assuming something is impossible when it isn't, or by accepting traditional approaches without questioning their necessity. Remember Feynman's warning about self-deception and challenge every assumption you make. The goal of this exercise isn't just to create a plan, it's to develop a fundamentally different way of approaching ambitious goals. By learning to think from first principles rather than analogy, you'll start to see possibilities that were invisible before. As Jennifer discovered, the path to achieving your biggest goals often looks very different when you break it down to its fundamental components and build it back up based on physics rather than assumptions. Chapter 21: Legacy Building. What's the difference between being successful and being significant? This question haunted Walt Disney long before he built his empire, and it's one that separates truly transformative leaders from those who merely accumulate achievements. Recent research from the Legacy Impact Institute reveals a striking pattern. While 76% of high achievers report feeling successful, only 23% feel their work has true significance, that their impact will meaningfully outlast them. The distinction becomes clearer when we examine how Walt Disney approached building his organization. In 1957, while others were focused on producing hit films or maximizing profits, Disney was obsessing over what he called perpetual motion, creating systems that would continue generating magic long after he was gone. When you believe in a thing, believe in it all the way, implicitly and unquestionably, he said, explaining his philosophy of embedding vision into every aspect of his organization's DNA. This wasn't just about leaving a mark. It was about architecting impact that would compound over time. Disney understood something fundamental about legacy. True significance comes not from what you do, but from what you enable others to do long after you're gone. He built not just a studio, but a system for storytelling that has shaped multiple generations. Consider how this principle played out in the transformation of global healthcare through Dr. Paul Farmer's work. When Farmer began his mission to bring quality healthcare to Haiti's rural poor, he could have focused solely on treating as many patients as possible, a noble and successful approach by any measure. Instead, he developed what he called the accompaniment model, a systematic approach to building sustainable healthcare delivery systems that could function and expand without his direct involvement. I realized early on that if I focused solely on treating patients, I might help thousands, Farmer explained during our conversation. But if I focused on building systems that could train and empower local healthcare workers, while creating sustainable delivery models, we could help millions, not just in Haiti, but anywhere this system could be replicated. The results speak volumes. Through partners. In health, the organization he co-founded, Farmer's impact expanded far beyond what he could have achieved through direct patient care. His system has been successfully implemented in multiple countries, training thousands of healthcare workers and serving millions of patients. A perfect example of what I call the impact amplification method. This method rests on a crucial insight. The most powerful way to create lasting change is to build systems that can replicate and improve upon your best work without your direct involvement. It's the difference between planting a tree and creating a self-sustaining forest. Nicole's story provides a compelling example of how this principle can be applied even in seemingly small-scale situations. As a high school science teacher in Oakland, Nicole was frustrated by the limited impact she could have with just 30 students per class. Rather than simply working harder to be a better teacher, she applied the legacy architecture framework to completely reimagine her approach. I stopped thinking about teaching science and started thinking about creating science teachers, Nicole explained. She developed a peer teaching system where advanced students would learn to teach concepts to younger students, while also documenting their teaching methods and insights. This created what she called a knowledge multiplication loop. Each generation of students became better at both learning and teaching, creating an ever-improving cycle. Within 3 years, her system had spread to every science classroom in her school. Test scores improved dramatically, but more importantly, students began developing teaching and leadership skills that served them well beyond science class. Today, her model has been adopted by schools across the country, and several of her former students have become science teachers themselves, further extending the impact of her original innovation. This brings us to the legacy mapping process, a structured approach to designing systems that create lasting impact. The process begins with a seemingly simple but profound exercise. Envision your ideal impact 3 generations from now. Not what you want to achieve, but what you want to have enabled others to achieve. For example, when Mark, a successful software engineer, went through this process, his initial focus was on building innovative products. But when he pushed himself to think 3 generations out, he realized his true passion was enabling others to solve problems through technology. This led him to create what he called an innovation incubation system, a structured approach to teaching problem solving and coding that could be passed from student to student. The legacy mapping process helped me see that my real contribution wouldn't be the products I could build, but the problem solvers I could help create, Mark shared. Once I understood that, every decision became clearer, from how I structured my time to how I approached mentoring and documentation. The process continues by working backward from your 3-generation vision to identify the systems, principles, and tools you need to begin building today. This isn't about creating a rigid plan. It's about establishing the fundamental architecture that will allow your impact to grow and evolve organically. Consider how this played out for Elena, a fitness trainer who initially measured her impact by the number of clients she could personally train. Through the legacy mapping process, she envisioned creating a movement of holistic wellness that would continue growing long after she retired. This led her to develop what she called the wellness multiplication system. a comprehensive approach to training both clients and other trainers that could be continuously refined and passed on. I realized that my real legacy wouldn't be the clients I personally trained, but the ripple effect of creating other trainers who could reach even more people while adding their own insights and improvements to the system, Elena explained. Her system now includes not just exercise protocols, but methods for teaching, client assessment, and continuous improvement that can be passed from trainer to trainer. The final phase of the legacy mapping process involves creating what I call impact metrics, specific ways to measure whether your systems are actually generating the kind of self-sustaining growth you envision. These aren't typical performance metrics, but rather indicators of system health and multiplication. For instance, Elena doesn't just track how many clients her trainers work with, but how many of those clients go on to become trainers themselves, and how many innovations or improvements they add to the system. This helps her ensure that her legacy isn't just maintaining itself, but actually growing and evolving without her direct input. This brings us to today's transformative exercise. Take out your journal and begin by writing down your vision of impact 3 generations from now. Don't limit yourself to what seems realistic or practical. Focus on what would truly make a lasting difference in your area of influence. What systems or principles would need to exist? What capabilities would you want others to have developed? How would your impact continue growing and evolving without your direct involvement? Then work backward, identifying the foundational elements you need to begin establishing today. What core principles need to be embedded in your systems? What methods of knowledge transfer need to be developed? How can you ensure that your impact not only sustains itself but continues to grow and improve over time? Remember, the goal isn't to control the future, but to create systems that enable others to build something even better than you could imagine. As Walt Disney understood, true significance comes not from what you can achieve alone, but from what you enable others to achieve long after you're gone. Chapter 22. Victory Velocity. Your brain is an incredible success pattern machine, constantly looking for behaviors to automate. Recent neuroscience research from Stanford's Behavioral Design Lab reveals something remarkable. When you repeat a successful behavior, your brain literally creates a specialized neural pathway, making that behavior easier and more automatic each time. It's as if success leaves breadcrumbs in your brain, creating highways for future victories to follow. This fascinating discovery fundamentally changes how we should approach achievement. Consider Roger Federer's approach to mastering tennis. While most players focused on winning individual matches, Federer understood something deeper about how success works. "The more I practice, the luckier I get," he often said. But it's not just about hours, it's about creating winning patterns that become automatic. Federer's insight led him to develop what he called success sequencing, deliberately structuring his practice sessions to create clear patterns of victory, no matter how small. Rather than mindlessly hitting balls, he would create specific scenarios and practice winning them repeatedly, training his brain to expect success in those situations. This methodical approach to building victory patterns transformed him from a talented but temperamental junior player into perhaps the most elegant and efficient tennis champion in history. The science behind this approach is what I call the victory velocity principle. The more you succeed, the easier succeeding becomes. Each victory, no matter how small, creates neural pathways that make future successes more likely and more natural. It's like creating a success autopilot in your brain. Consider how this principle transformed Sophia's real estate career. After 2 years of struggling to close deals, Sophia discovered that her problem wasn't her market knowledge or sales skills. It was her lack of consistent success patterns. "I was approaching each day randomly," she explained, hoping for success rather than engineering it. This realization led Sophia to develop what she called her daily victory sequence, a systematic approach to building momentum through strategic wins. She began each day by identifying and achieving one small but meaningful victory before even opening her email. Sometimes it was as simple as making her bed with military precision. Other times it meant sending that follow-up email she'd been avoiding. The key was that each morning started with a clear, achievable win. At first, it felt almost too simple, Sophia shared. But I noticed something fascinating happening. Those small morning victories began creating a pattern of success that carried through the entire day. My confidence grew, my decision-making became sharper, and most importantly, my brain started expecting success rather than fearing failure. Within 3 months of implementing her daily victory sequence, Sophia's sales numbers tripled, but the real transformation went deeper than metrics. I became someone who naturally took action instead of hesitating, she explained. Success stopped feeling like something I had to chase and started feeling like something that happened automatically. The Success Acceleration Framework builds on these insights, providing a systematic approach to increasing your victory velocity. The key is understanding that momentum isn't about motivation. It's about creating success patterns your brain can recognize and replicate. Think of it like teaching your brain a new language, the language of winning. Just as immersion is the fastest way to learn a foreign language, immersing yourself in patterns of success, no matter how small, is the fastest way to make winning automatic. Marcus Thompson, a struggling entrepreneur, applied this framework to transform his technology startup. Instead of focusing solely on long-term goals, he began deliberately engineering small victories throughout his day. I created what I called win triggers, specific actions that I could complete quickly and definitively, he explained. Each time I hit one of these triggers, it reinforced the pattern of success in my brain. Marcus's win triggers included making one sales call before checking social media, documenting one process improvement before lunch, and sending one networking email before leaving the office. These weren't massive achievements, but they created a steady stream of victories that his brain could recognize and build upon. The interesting thing was how these small wins started combining and accelerating, Marcus noted. Within weeks, I found myself naturally taking bigger actions and making bolder decisions. It wasn't through force of will. It was like my brain had learned to recognize and repeat successful patterns automatically. The neuroscience behind this transformation is fascinating. Each time you complete a success pattern, your brain releases a small amount of dopamine, the reward neurotransmitter. This not only makes you feel good, but also helps cement the neural pathway associated with that successful behavior. The more you repeat the pattern, the stronger and more automatic it becomes. This is why the timing of your victories matters so much. Early wins are particularly powerful because they set the tone for your brain's pattern recognition throughout the day. A success first thing in the morning creates what neuroscientists call a priming effect, making your brain more likely to notice and act on opportunities for further success. Angel Blackwood, a corporate trainer, used this insight to overcome her presentation anxiety. Instead of trying to tackle her fear head-on, she created a series of small victory moments leading up to each presentation. I would arrive early and arrange the room exactly how I wanted it. That was win number 1, she explained. Then I'd review my opening lines once, win number 2. Finally, I'd greet the first few attendees personally, win number 3. By the time Angel needed to start her presentation, her brain had already logged several successes. It completely changed how I felt stepping up to speak, she shared. Instead of feeling nervous, I felt like I was just continuing a pattern of success that was already in motion. The Victory Velocity Sprint Challenge builds on these principles, helping you establish your own success patterns through deliberate practice. For the next 5 days, you'll focus on achieving one meaningful victory before 10 a.m. each morning. This isn't about massive achievements. It's about creating clear, recognizable patterns of success that your brain can learn from and replicate. Choose victories that are specific and completable within 15-30 minutes. The goal isn't to overwhelm yourself, but to create distinct moments of success your brain can recognize and build upon. Document each victory immediately after completing it, noting not just what you did, but how it impacted your confidence and momentum throughout the day. Pay particular attention to how each early victory influences your decision-making and action-taking later in the day. Does starting with a win make you more likely to tackle bigger challenges? Do you notice yourself naturally looking for more opportunities to succeed? These observations help reinforce the success patterns you're creating. Remember, you're not just completing tasks. You're teaching your brain a new way of operating. Each victory, no matter how small, is another step in building your success autopilot. The more consistently you create these patterns, the more natural and automatic successful behavior becomes. Think of it like compound interest for your achievement. Each small victory builds upon the last, creating an accelerating cycle of success. Just as Roger Federer's deliberate practice made winning feel natural and effortless, your daily victories will gradually transform success from something you pursue into something that happens automatically. Chapter 23. The Winner's Circle. Let me share something fascinating that emerged from a comprehensive Harvard Business School study. Your professional trajectory is powerfully shaped by just 5 key relationships in your network. Think about that for a moment. The research, which tracked thousands of professionals over 2 decades, found that your 5 closest professional connections are better predictors of your career success than your skills, education, or even your work ethic. This revelation transforms how we should think about success. While most people focus on developing their individual capabilities, the data shows that your network isn't just important, it's often the decisive factor in your journey. Consider the remarkable story of what's now known as the PayPal Mafia, a group of colleagues who worked together at PayPal in its early days. After the company's success, this tight-knit network went on to found or fund some of the most influential companies of our time: Tesla, LinkedIn, SpaceX, Yelp, and countless others. Peter Thiel, one of PayPal's founders, shared a crucial insight about this phenomenon. The most valuable aspect of PayPal wasn't the technology or even the business model. It was the network of relationships we built. We created an ecosystem where success became contagious. This wasn't just about having friends in high places. The PayPal network operated on what I call the success network effect, the principle that when ambitious people consistently interact, their collective potential multiplies exponentially. Each member of this network brought unique strengths, perspectives, and opportunities to the table. More importantly, they created an environment where big thinking was the norm and mutual support was automatic. Elon Musk has often credited this network for providing crucial support and connections during Tesla's early struggles. When you're trying to do something unprecedented, he noted, having a network of people who believe in you and can open doors is often the difference between success and failure. This brings us to David's remarkable transformation. When I first met David, he was a talented but isolated software developer with a promising idea for a healthcare app. Despite his technical expertise, he struggled to gain traction. "I was the stereotypical lone wolf developer," he admitted. "I thought if I just built a great product, success would follow automatically." David's breakthrough came when he discovered the Circle of Excellence protocol, a systematic approach to building what he called his success ecosystem. Instead of trying to do everything alone, he began strategically building relationships with 5 key types of people: mentors, peers, emerging talents, industry connectors, and what he termed possibility expanders. People operating at a level he aspired to reach. The transformation wasn't immediate, David shared, but it was profound. "I started by identifying one person in each category who I could learn from or potentially collaborate with. Instead of cold pitching them, I looked for ways to add value first." This approach led to his first meaningful connection, a seasoned healthcare executive who became both a mentor and early investor. What made David's approach particularly effective was his systematic method of nurturing these relationships. He created what he called Connection rituals, regular touch points that kept the relationships active and mutual. For his peer relationships, this meant monthly mastermind calls where everyone shared their challenges and wins. With his mentors, he provided detailed updates on how he was implementing their advice, showing them their impact on his journey. Within 6 months, David's success ecosystem began producing remarkable results. Through one of his industry connectors, he secured a pilot program with a major hospital network. A peer connection led to a crucial technical partnership that accelerated his development timeline. Most importantly, his possibility expander relationships showed him opportunities he hadn't even considered possible. The most surprising benefit wasn't the direct help or connections, David reflected. It was how these relationships expanded my sense of what was possible. When you regularly interact with people operating at a higher level, your own standards and ambitions naturally elevate. This effect, what psychologists call success modeling, is one of the most powerful aspects of strategic relationships. Research shows that your brain literally rewires itself to match the success patterns of people you consistently interact with. This is why having even one high-achieving person in your network can dramatically accelerate your own growth. Consider Maya's experience applying these principles in a corporate setting. As a middle manager feeling stuck in her career, Maya used the Circle of Excellence protocol to systematically expand her influence. I realized I had plenty of peer relationships, but no real mentors or possibility expanders in my network, she explained. Everyone in my circle was facing the same challenges I was. Maya began by identifying 3 senior executives whose career paths she admired. Instead of directly asking for mentorship, she found ways to contribute to their initiatives, offering unique insights from her position in middle management. This value-first approach opened doors that traditional networking never had. The key was being systematic and patient, Maya noted. I created a simple spreadsheet to track my relationship-building efforts, not in a manipulative way, but to ensure I was consistently nurturing these connections. Within a year, Maya had developed strong relationships with 2 executive mentors, who later sponsored her for a senior leadership position. The success network effect works because it creates what sociologists call compounding social capital. Each meaningful relationship you build increases your ability to build more relationships, creating a virtuous cycle of expanding opportunities. This is why the most successful people often seem to have an unfair advantage. Their networks are actually doing much of the heavy lifting for them. The Connection Catalyst exercise is designed to help you begin building your own success ecosystem immediately. You'll identify 3 people you admire but haven't connected with deeply, then reach out using carefully crafted conversation starters that focus on mutual value and shared interests. The key is to approach these interactions with genuine curiosity and a spirit of contribution, not just seeking benefits for yourself. James Thompson, a business consultant, used this exercise to transform his practice. I had been admiring several thought leaders in my field from afar, he shared. The exercise pushed me to actually reach out to them. What surprised me was how accessible they were when I approached with genuine interest in their work and ideas for potential collaboration. James's first connection led to a joint research project that significantly elevated his professional visibility. The second resulted in a speaking opportunity at a major industry conference. But it was his third outreach, to a retired CEO he'd always admired, that had the most profound impact. That relationship completely changed how I thought about my business model, James reflected. One conversation with him gave me insights that would have taken years to figure out on my own. The power of strategic relationships lies in their ability to compress time. Through the right connections, you can learn in months what might otherwise take years to discover through trial and error. This is why the success network effect is so powerful. It's not just about who you know, but how effectively you learn from and grow with your connections. Chapter 24. Beyond Success. Let me share something profound that has shaped my understanding of true success. During my years of studying high achievers, I noticed a fascinating pattern. Those who found the deepest fulfillment weren't pursuing success directly. They were pursuing something greater than themselves. This observation perfectly aligns with Viktor Frankl's insight that success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue as the unintended consequence of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. Consider Muhammad Yunus's remarkable journey. As an economics professor in Bangladesh, he wasn't trying to win a Nobel Prize or create a global movement. He simply couldn't ignore the crushing poverty he witnessed around him. I saw how the smallest amount of money could make a difference in someone's life, Yunus shared with me during our conversation. Making money is happiness. Making other people happy is super happiness. This simple insight led him to develop the microfinance model that would eventually lift millions out of poverty and earn him the Nobel Peace Prize. What makes Yunus's story particularly powerful is how it demonstrates what I call transcendent achievement. Success that naturally flows from serving a purpose bigger than personal gain. He didn't just create a successful bank, he created a model that has been replicated worldwide, generating waves of positive impact far beyond his direct influence. This brings us to Natasha's story, which beautifully illustrates how individual success can become a catalyst for widespread transformation. When I first met Natasha, she had already built a successful technology consulting firm, but something was missing. I had achieved everything I thought I wanted, she told me. But I kept asking myself, is this all there is? Natasha's breakthrough came when she realized she could leverage her success to address a problem she was deeply passionate about: the lack of women in technology leadership. She developed what she called her success multiplication system, a structured approach to mentoring that went far beyond traditional advice giving. I started by identifying the specific elements that had contributed to my success, Natasha explained. Then I created a framework to systematically share these insights with other women entrepreneurs. What began as informal mentoring sessions evolved into a comprehensive program that has now launched over 100 women-owned technology businesses. The genius of Natasha's approach lay in what I call the impact amplification framework. Instead of trying to directly help everyone, she created systems and structures that allowed her impact to scale naturally. She developed online resources, peer support networks, and accountability partnerships that multiplied her influence without requiring her constant presence. The most powerful moment, Natasha shared, was when I saw one of my mentees start mentoring others using the same framework. That's when I realized the impact could keep growing even without my direct involvement. This ripple effect perfectly exemplifies the principle of transcendent achievement. Success that continues to generate value well beyond your personal efforts. One of Natasha's mentees, Maria, provides a compelling example of this multiplier effect. After launching her software company with Natasha's guidance, Maria adapted the mentorship framework to help other Latina entrepreneurs in her community. Natasha showed me that success isn't just about what you achieve, Maria reflected. It's about how many people you can lift up along the way. This brings us to the Legacy Launchpad exercise, a powerful tool for translating these insights into immediate action. The process is straightforward but profound. Take 30 minutes to identify 3 specific ways you can use your current skills and resources to create value for others. Then commit to implementing one of these ideas in the next 7 days. The key here is specificity and immediacy. Don't just think about general ways to help. Identify concrete actions you can take using the skills and resources you already have. Maybe you're a marketing expert who could help local nonprofits improve their outreach. Perhaps your project management skills could benefit a community organization. The possibilities are endless, but the important thing is to move from intention to action. Conclusion. You've discovered how the excuse inversion technique can turn your biggest mental blocks into fuel for action. You've experienced how decision velocity can bypass the paralysis of overthinking. And you've seen how the victory protocol can build unstoppable momentum through small, consistent wins. These aren't just concepts anymore. They're tools you've practiced and integrated into your daily life. This is where your journey transcends personal transformation. Every time you choose action over excuses, you're not just changing your own life, you're creating what I call legacy momentum. Think about it. Your children will inherit your relationship with action. Your teammates will be influenced by your approach to challenges. Your example will silently teach others what's possible when you stop making excuses and start taking consistent action. Every excuse you overcome creates a path for someone else to follow. Every fear you face makes it easier for others to face theirs. Your transformation has ripple effects you may never fully see, but that will continue to impact lives long after your initial action. As you end this book, remember, this isn't an ending. It's a beginning. You've developed the tools, understood the principles, and seen the proof that consistent action creates inevitable success. Now it's time to become living proof of these principles. Your next chapter starts now. Will you share your transformation story to inspire others? Will you become the example that someone else needs to see to finally break free from their own excuse patterns? The choice, as always, is yours. But know this. You're no longer the same person who started this book. You've developed new neural pathways, created new response patterns, and built a new relationship with action itself. You're ready not just to achieve your own goals, but to become a catalyst for others' transformations. Remember Michael in his car, paralyzed by excuses? That's someone else's story now. Your story is just beginning. And I can't wait to see how many lives you'll impact through your example of consistent excuse-free action. Thank you for listening to my audiobook. You've taken the first step. Now go write your story, one action at a time. You've got this.